G'day, May 40 here, so I was not expecting that Super Bowl. All right, I was not expecting that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would absolutely run away with it. Right, so what are some of the spiritual lessons to be learned from the Super Bowl? So there's such a figure as Psycho Tom. So most of the time when Tom Brady, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback, is interviewed, he is, an mild-mannered, shucks, inoffensive dude. But then when he gets triggered on the football field, it brings out a whole different side to his personality. So the spiritual lesson is that we and pretty much everyone else, we're very different people depending upon context, right? Change the context, change the man. And so Psycho Tom, completely different personality. And we all have a psycho inside of us. It just depends on a particular context to bring it out. Now, I was afraid that the Kansas City Chiefs were just going to run away with things last night. I didn't know how their offense could be stopped. But there's something that prevents any offense from getting untracked, and that's if they don't have any blocking. And the Kansas City Chiefs, their offensive line were largely reserves, and so the defensive ends by the Buccaneers were just beating the heck out of the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line. So if you can't block anyone, you can't get a running game going, and you can't get a passing game going because the pocket's going to collapse on you before you have the receivers have times to develop their routes. So normally in the National Football League, you can expect up to about 3 seconds before the pocket collapses, but the pocket was collapsing on Patrick Mahomes routinely within 2 seconds. He was under pressure something like 57% of the times that he dropped back to pass. And according to Next Gen Stats, he ran around for 500 yards behind the line of scrimmage, the most ever measured since they started looking at that statistic. And in the course of the game, Patrick Mahomes threw 7 of the most unbelievable incomplete passes you will ever see. He kept repeatedly hitting his receivers, like right in the face mask. I mean, he was on 4th and 9 on one play. He was horizontal to the ground, throwing the ball into the end zone, and he hits his receiver in the face mask. The receiver doesn't make the catch. There are like 7 spectacular drops by the Kansas City Chiefs. Another spiritual lesson, we were talking about holding and how much the refs would let them get away. Well, the refs pretty much called the game like a regular game. Normally in the playoffs, refs face incentives whereby their career can be heavily hurt by if they throw too many flags. And so generally speaking, the incentives work against refs throwing flags. And they called it like a normal game in the Super Bowl, and the Kansas City Chiefs did not adjust. Now, they were the victims of a couple of bad calls. I think that was fairly obvious. And we've got Babs here sending me 4 times this particular link. So we'll get back to the spiritual lessons of the Super Bowl in 1 minute, but it's very important that I play this link, says Babs.
Everyone who thinks that they are gay should struggle to lead a heterosexual life.
That's interesting.
If there were no moral rules and no police, men would grab women and do what they wanted as a rule. That is the way men are made.
Yeah.
The fact that your man doesn't act that way is because he has been given a set of rules and because he knows that he will be punished.
See, that's so interesting to me.
Men know this, and we males, I am one of them, I am male.
Yeah.
We know this from a very early age. We can't act out our sexual nature.
If the dial of ideas was turned to low for the last few years, it's quickly moving into the hot position. And I have to say that my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
My life is devoted to fighting evil. I want to destroy evil.
Yeah.
This is really critical. If there's no God, there's no good and evil. There are only opinions about good and evil. Here is a fact.
There's no God over me. There's no policeman over me.
There's no one over me. I am God.
Okay, what are the other spiritual lessons from the Super Bowl? I'm just thinking about my own Dallas Cowboys. For the first 5 weeks of the season, they had the #1 rated offense in the NFL. Then their quarterback got injured and their offense collapsed for the next month. Also, their offensive line was heavily injured. So towards the end of the season, they couldn't get anything going in the last game of the year against the New York Giants. They couldn't get anything going on the ground or through the air because the quarterback just didn't have time to pass the ball, and there were no spaces for running backs to run through. So we're all, to a degree, we're all system players. We all do better or worse depending on the system that we're operating in. So, for example, you give me a particular circumstance and I can be awesome, but you take me out of particular circumstances and I'm just completely ordinary. And for many of us, that's the way it is. In particular circumstances, we can absolutely shine, take us out of those particular set of circumstances, and we're completely ordinary. So in sporting terms, that's called a system player, but we're all system players. Okay, what are the other spiritual lessons to be derived from this? Tom Brady winning his 7th Super Bowl at age 43. Yeah. Just an amazing performance by Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That Kansas City Chiefs never, ever been shut down like this. Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback, had never been punished like this. And so you can have an amazing quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, amazing receivers, and if you can't give him time to throw, it's all for naught, right? And also he threw 7 of the most amazing incompletions you will ever see, because his receivers didn't catch the ball. So we can often do amazing work, but if we're part of a team and other members of the team don't live up to their obligations, then often our amazing work can just go for naught, and there's nothing you can do about it. Oh, the Tampa Bay center, I think his name's Kenny, he developed a process where he would play through the whistle and then 2 more beats. So he keeps pushing and shoving people for about 2 beats after the whistle, and then other people understandably get annoyed and they retaliate. And then when they retaliate, they get flagged. So I think it was Chris Jones, the Kansas City chief defensive lineman, who got flagged for personal foul because Kenny was so annoying. And there are just tons of people like Kenny in our daily lives who are incredibly annoying. But if we retaliate, then we're the ones who get punished. We're the ones who get flagged. And that's the way the world works. It's filled with annoying people, and often there's just nothing you can do about it. Okay, I'm going to bring Dooovid on in a few minutes, but Babs sent along a clip of me from 2015.
I'm worried about Okay, we're live. Sorry about that. I'm back. I'm being interviewed by a friend who's spent his entire life as a modern Orthodox Jew.
Okay, we were discussing the subject of porn. I just have a few more questions on it. What percentage of Jewish men do you think watch porn?
I'm trying to decide whether I think it's smaller or larger than the general population. My sense is that it's larger than the general population. It's a high percentage. Jews tend to be less inhibited about the pursuit of sex, money, power, fame, honor, or the natural passions, because Judaism has such a unpretentious attitude to these things that Jews tend to be very direct and blunt about them, and have fewer what's called hang-ups. And so even though Judaism would condemn pornography, my sense is that Jews are much more sexually promiscuous than non-Jewish whites, and certainly more than Orientals, more than Catholics and Protestants. So yeah, my sense is that Jews probably use porn more than non-Jews do, and it seems like every kind of kink you find more Jews proportionally than non-Jews.
So on the same topic, but a little over, the Ashley Madison case recently, do you think that there would be a higher percentage of Jews per capita involved in that?
Yeah. I think Jews would have fewer compunctions about any type of sex that they want, or any type of money that they want. Like, Jews are much more
entitlement.
They're just much more morally flexible. So it gives them an advantage in business, gives them an advantage in taking tests, or in academic achievement. In my life experience, my perception of reality, Jews are much more likely to cheat in an academic setting or a business setting. And Jews have many wonderful qualities in addition to these more dubious qualities. They're much less likely to commit murder or rape than.
Okay, Dooovid, let's say hello to Dooovid. Haven't spoken to you for a week or two. How are you, Dooovid?
Baruch Hashem, thank God. Good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did it go on Week in Review yesterday? I saw it got a little contentious about 3 hours and 40 minutes into the show.
I'm not sure. I mean, because we're trying to push forward, and I was like pretty strict. Like I wanted to read over and get through some of these models, and but I think that's a normal Week in Review. Different guests, and me and Jennifer have our back and forths, but I don't know if it was that contentious. I mean, because we talk for hours and hours, and then to try to keep on the same wavelength, and then even me to try to convince Jennifer to exert a significant amount of attention to a specific subject.
And I think Week in Review went almost 7 hours. So how much of that time were you on the show yesterday?
Probably like 90% of it, just a few breaks where I took a little medicine or used the bathroom or got some food ready. And probably even 70% of it was me talking. So even though we had guests, I think, maybe not 70%, but most Week in Reviews, like over half of it's me talking. So what we're covering, we're getting in more in depth. I was talking about this field called the science of expertise. And it was rather interesting. You might even be interested to take a look at some of it. But there's these models that are psychological models for how a person goes about acquiring expertise in fields, and then questions about is expertise generalizable in factors like IQ and various implications about can anybody obtain expertise, or are people more qualified than others to obtain expertise? And so it's actually pretty interesting, and it's also very interesting that it's related to chess. I saw that Dennis Prager, David Rubin, little thing there had a chessboard in it, but a lot of the best studies related to expertise have been studied on chess players, and I don't know if it's 12-step related, because it's kind of like self-improvement related, but it's a scientific study of the self-improvement process, and it might also be interested, related to Judaism, because in theory, Orthodox Judaism is probably supposed to be a self-improvement process.
And Abraham Joshua Twerski, an Israeli-American Hasidic rabbi, died January 31. Did you ever read any of his books, or do you have any thoughts on Abraham Twerski or the Twerski family?
Yeah, I read quite a few of his books. I met him. I didn't really meet him. I went to an event where he spoke, but I did get to meet him and even speak to him for tens of seconds after, when he came to Metro Detroit, and I think even hundreds of people probably showed up. I had studied in Bobov Yeshiva, and there's a lot of Twerskis that are related. I guess there's different Twerskis that are more loosely related to than others. Like there's the New Square Hasidus Twerskis, and they're distantly related to the Milwaukee Twerskis, and they're actually, I think, related to the Lubavitch Rebbe. So they're well known, and I probably met like tens, maybe even like hundreds of Twerskis in my day that were, like even probably like 30% of them are rabbis. And in fact, I don't know if you ever met that loser Twerski. I think he even went out to LA, and I remember I met him at Cholent with Isaac Schoenfeld, and the first thing he told me is, like, he said a joke about Twerskis. He said, you're either a rabbi, a psychiatrist, or a doctor, or in therapy, or something like that. And I don't know about you in LA, but like I would assume you've met probably tens and tens of Twerskis.
Yeah, in fact, early on in my conversion process, something like 1992 or 1993, I got an email. One of my first uses of email was from a Twerski in Chicago who heard that I was converting to Judaism and I'd written about it. And so I sent him a copy of my conversion story. So I don't remember which Twerski, but among the first people that I met online in Orthodox Judaism was a Twerski. So they're definitely a big name in Orthodox Judaism. And go ahead.
Although his books were kind of, I don't know if he really was like breaking scholarship. I mean, it was kind of like pop psychology, and I'm not saying it wasn't good, but I'd read a few of his books. His books were very prominent. But I think like you, like I like hitting the books and going straight to the academic work or Freud. And I even went to like a special Freudian school. So I always found his books were kind of like dumbed down into like, pop Hasidus or something like that. So I'm not opposed to his books, but like, I don't even know if I own one of his books.
Yeah. And who's this gay Hindu that you've been debating, I think, on Jen's show? And you've been discussing the Noahide laws. What's the discussion there?
An activist who found me. He reached out to me from probably seeing me on Adam Green. He's been at it for years, and he's done different things. He was actually the founder of Hindus for Trump, and I could tell you his bio, but he was a Jehovah's Witness as a kid, and then he left Jehovah's Witness and became homosexual and Hindu. But he's been a big activist. He's a good organizer. He has some education, but mostly just hard work and organizing. And for some reason, he took note of the Noahide laws, and he was, so to say, worried about it. And like the people who watch Week in Review heard him. He's like his obvious bias that he's homosexual and pagan, self-proclaimed, I don't want to call him idol worshiper, but to say that he could be scared of these Noahide laws. But he produced extensive research. He has a webpage like Stop Noahide Law of hundreds and hundreds of these proclamations endorsing the Noahide laws. And I'm not sure like how much you know about the Lubavitch Rebbe, but like the Lubavitch Rebbe was given the keys to hundreds of cities where mayors literally gave the Lubavitch Rebbe the key to cities. And a lot of the Lubavitch Rebbe's, like it was one of the proclamations. It wasn't the primal directive, but at some point the Rebbe made a directive that shlichim, emissaries of the Rebbe, should promote the Noahide laws. So like Hanukkah ceremonies, one of the things that a lot of Chabad rabbis do is go to City Hall and try to get some sort of proclamation put in favor of the Noahide laws. And in fact, a lot of them might even try to get Chabad and specifically Rabbi Menachem Mendel Shterson written into the proclamation. Have been quite successful at doing it. So this guy was kind of like an activist against it. But I spoke to him, and I told him he's a pretty like agreeable, intelligent, like nonviolent, kind of intellectual guy, and we were both kind of Hindu, so I was telling him like it's music to my ears. I was really glad to hear it, even though he's an activist crusading against it. So he's kind of became like a regular guest. And I think it's ironic, like you don't have any like Chabadsters that come and report to you, and they probably wouldn't. It's not their style. But so I got this crusader against the Noahide laws, and he talks about his activism against it. But like, from my perspective, whatever. We also debate and talk about various topics. And actually, we talked. There was a professor in Metro Detroit who I knew IRL that's been popping on, and we talked about the ICC court decision regarding Palestine and Israel. And I informed him like something else that most people don't know is that like Israeli politicians, military people, even face war crime charges coming here to Metro Detroit. That your average Jew in Metro Detroit might not know that, but some like the high-ranking Israeli officials don't really come to Detroit, and it's because they would attempt to charge them with war crime trials, and they could probably come anyways if they really wanted to, but so it's just ironic, and I told them that people watching, I even compared him to you, God forbid. I said this guy, Vince Bruno, gives more accurate information about what's going on in Israel than Luke Ford does, even though he's kind of like a crusader against what we're doing. So I thought that was ironic like that, but he's like, I don't call him my friend, but pretty agreeable, and we have friendly discussions.
And he's offended by the Noahide laws because he's gay. Is that the primary reason that they offend him?
That's he hasn't said that. He just said that it's worrying, and he wants to warn people. And he was on Adam Green. He was on True News. He had a webpage. He agrees that it could be his bias, but he doesn't claim that that's the reason he's doing it. He claims that it's just bad. It doesn't make any sense why governments are making these proclamations in favor of the Noahide laws.
And does Hinduism have much of a problem with homosexuality?
It's disputed. It actually changed in India, I think, like in the last 2-3 years, where homosexuality used to be illegal, and they got rid of that just a few years ago due to international pressure. There's some Hindus that claim homosexuality is like a minor offense. There's some form of like Hinduism that includes homosexuality, but is not mainstream. But I'm not sure. I would maybe it's a low testosterone culture, in that homosexuality is a lesser problem just due to lower testosterone in general. If you were playing your comparison of Jews to white people, or if some sort of testosterone ranking, that I think Indians relatively are pretty low testosterone.
And go ahead.
But like, yeah, probably I wouldn't be surprised if homosexuality is pretty rampant there, but it's not like the Jews. God forbid. Everybody knows that statistically homosexuality is most rampant among the Jews.
Had a question and it just briefly left my mind. So, how's your Black History Month going?
As I didn't think about it. I mean, because COVID-19, I live in a majority African-American neighborhood, but no, nothing remarkable. It may be Martin Luther King Day if that passed. I watched some of these virtual Jewish black events. And I actually read that Unz article on, and I was, Jonathan Greenblatt testifying about, God forbid, the ADL, and he's saying these people are crazy. They think that, there's these pedophile, so-and-so, but and then you comparison, like the Leo Frank case to like Harvey Weinstein. And it's like, I was looking at the evidence, and God forbid, I even bought that book by the Nation of Islam, but just that Unz article that drew a little, and even the family of this woman has the Mary Fagan or whatever, the God forbid, her own family has a webpage, documenting some of this evidence. But just to say that, was that like a Harvey Weinstein in that period, and God forbid, the evidence is overwhelming.
And you sent me a link to an essay by Kevin Barrett about some Elias Davidsson. I sued a Zionist Wikipedia editor for slander, and I won. So what did you make of this story?
The only thing that I thought was interesting and relevant to this was that this Banhammer person that was the great defender of Israel is this convert to Judaism. And I guess he'd been using a handle, and took him 3 years to figure out who he is, the Grunwald or whoever, who is this Wikipedia editor. And that he claimed that he had been slandering falsely people as anti-Israel, and the relevance that it's a convert, and there could be, you've mentioned that there's a lot of infighting among converts, and it could also be that there's more of a protection mechanism among converts. Although I'm not sure, that may not be accurate, but I thought that was interesting. Just the article mentioned that that this guy's a convert to Judaism.
Now, on who's the Charles Moskowitz? You did a show with Charles Moskowitz last week, and you kind of pushed back on some of his more conventional thinking. And I think you pointed out to the effect that many Jews view Christianity as akin to QAnon. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I like Charles Moskowitz, and we do our show and argue these points again and again. But I essentially, he's kind of like the apologist who's trying to make Judaism look good to a certain perspective, and from my perspective is largely inaccurate, and especially because in Israel, the direction, the portrayal of what's going on in Israel is quite inaccurate. To say that especially now that a lot of these things are openly the platform of like major parties that have tens of percent, but to say the opinion of Jews on Christianity, and Vincent's idea that Christian, or Adam Green, that Christians should be worried about Jews because we believe in the end of days Messiah is going to come and is going to declare Christianity idol worship, and if you're a true believer in Christianity, you're going to be in some trouble. And to say from a Jewish perspective, you say, well, yes, of course, that's what we believe. It's like, God forbid, you say, like, how dare you, like it's going to cause bad relations with the Jew and Gentile to say that. But I think it's pretty clear that you say, like, almost, as I put it, like, no Jew in their right mind believes in Christianity. Would even fathom like that this is even conceivable. It would almost be so preposterous to your typical Jew that Christianity basically sounds like a QAnon theory. Hence, we talked about this before, where say like Jews are paranoid, and one of the biggest paranoia causes to Jews is Christianity. That there's a church on every corner. No matter how comfortable I feel here in America, I know when I pop in my car and drive to the major corner, there's going to be a church, and we know what their book says. And so from a Jewish perspective, Christianity is basically a conspiracy against us. And to say, like, I'm not saying that all Jews, but like, yeah, I think like 20, 30, a large majority of Jews basically look at it like that. We're not trying to have problems with our Gentile neighbors. And, think saying we're hostile to the church theologically, but I don't think we're hostile to the church really, like, politically or to that perspective. But I thought I wanted to make it clear to Charles that like, no Jew in their right mind is going to believe Christianity, almost to the point where it's comparable to like a QAnon conspiracy theory. You disagree?
No, I absolutely agree. I just love the way you put it. I wouldn't have thought of that perspective, but it's absolutely accurate from what I see. And how did Charles respond?
I mean, he did his kind of like Pilpul apologetic attempts, and he did come to some kind of agreement. And he also kind of argued on the point that I said, like, Jews generally, probably parallel to Christians, have a similar belief that it's like all these people that are wanting, like, oh, the Christian Zionists, they think at the end of the days Messiah is going to come, and it's going to be Jesus, and if the Jews don't accept Jesus, we're going to be destroyed. Therefore, the Christian Zionists are anti-Semites, God forbid. But saying, like, no, I mean, that's basically what Jews believe. That's what we believe. We believe that Messiah is going to come, and you're either going to get in line or you're going to be destroyed. I mean, God forbid, but that's pretty clearly what the scripture says, and that's really what almost all religions say. And God forbid, if I half Galicia, if you didn't have what to talk about, I was mentioning the Rabbi Balkany, who I mentioned, Rabashkin's brother-in-law, who had been put in prison by Steve Cohen at GameStop. I'm not sure if you covered GameStop and the role of Steve Cohen. And they were mentioning Otisville Prison. I was showing him this Larry Noodles blog from Otisville Prison. And there was like interesting stuff like, God forbid, the Rabbi Mendel Cowprod Epstein. If you remember his story, he's like the gabbai of the minion there. They say like there's a minion in Otisville Prison, and it's this Rabbi Mendel Epstein of infamy that controls the minion there. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with any of this stuff or that interests you.
Yeah, mildly. I think there was a New York Times article on it, wasn't there? A lot of Frum Jews are there.
Yeah, I mean that's the main. I mean, if you're in a white collar crime in the New York area, and I mean, there's there's millions of Jews in New York, and at the end of the day, there's hundreds of Jews that are convicted of white collar crimes, and probably tens that are in Otisville, and that's some of the most infamous ones where Steve Cohen, who was the hedge fund, the owner of the Mets, who God forbid, I'm not sure what's going to happen to the GameStop, but he was the hedge fund that short GameStop, that he caused Rabbi Balkany go to prison, and it was considered extortion. But it's ironic because at the end of the day, Rabbi Balkany was just collecting money for a yeshiva. He was an aggressive rabbi collecting money for a yeshiva, and he threatened to extort or give information about Mr. Cohen, God forbid, if he didn't give money to the yeshiva. And he went to the FBI, and they ended up throwing him in prison for trying to extort money out of Mr. Cohen. And it was just ironic that it's the same Steve Cohen that had this aggressive charity collecting rabbi thrown in prison, that went on to become, I think now they estimate his worth like $14 billion. He owns the New York Mets. But he's the one who's getting squeezed on the short, and for what, he's been a hedge fund operator for decades now, that, whatever reason, he strategically chose to put billions of dollars on the line shorting GameStop.
And how have you enjoyed the GameStop story? Did you do any investing yourself?
No, I tried, just avoid it. And the 2-day clearing, it's just, I could tell it was rigged. I thought of day trading a few times, opening up an account, and especially when they had like the Robinhood app where you could, you just do it to even free at small amounts. But like the 2-day clearing rule is really dumb, and there's really no reason for it. And so I just like how am I going to day trade if every time I do a trade, I have to wait 2 days to do the next transaction?
Yeah. And
I don't know if you trade like that. And I have friends like if you went to synagogue, I'm sure where you go to a synagogue, that like people are checking their phones and trading stocks like during Mincha.
Yeah, I don't day trade, but I mean, I did buy some Bitcoin 3 weeks ago, and then I sold it this morning for a 15% profit. Do you indulge in Bitcoin?
No, I'm not having to invest in that. You know, I saw the CNN special on on Amazon returns where it was saying that 25% of Amazon returns end up in the garbage, and they try to like bulk them together and sell in closeouts. My eBay's going pretty slow right now. I sold most of my more expensive stuff. I still am selling quite a few CDs every day. Thank God I'm making tens of dollars every day, supplement income from the CDs. But and I got a ton of books. I got like 1,000 books, but unfortunately they're really just not worth that much money. So even I'd probably only be able to get a few $100s out of it, even all these books. But I could probably buy a lot. If I wanted to make money, like that's what we do. Like we're middlemen, and you just buy something and sell it because you can. And it's not really my character to do that. So if I had like bills that I was more pressing, or building up a family, or I don't even know that would cause me to do it. But to some extent, it's not that difficult to make money. All you have to do is buy low and sell high.
Now, there was a lot of talk about anti-Semitism in connection with the GameStop story. Did you follow any of that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's God forbid, it's a given that the elites are overrepresented by Jews. So, in a case like this, if someone's pointing out that there's an overrepresentation of Jews at the center of this, it's tough to say that that's anti-Semitism. They say the implication. What does it mean that the majority of the major players in this are Jewish? God forbid. I was on a call in a local synagogue, and God bless him, to some Fred Guttenberg, the anti-gun activist whose daughter, God forbid, was killed in Parkland Douglas shooting. And he was, doing a call promoting his book, and why we need to be so concerned in gun legislation. But there's a lot of lack of communication, that people really don't understand things from the other person's perspective. And at this point, it's almost too late. Like you say, like this, like decades later, all this time later, are we really gonna seriously take the other person's perspective to oh, that's where you guys were coming from? And I mean, how do you see that happening? You sent me some message also, like Trump, the impeachment. If you're saying that the Orthodox Jewish attorney, so it's saying that yeah, I mean, you'd have to be blind to not notice that Trump's attorney is Jewish and wearing a yarmulke. I mean, how could you not notice that? And so if it's anti-Semitism, you say you can't draw any conclusion from it. The fact that Trump blatantly has a Jewish attorney, so much that he's even wearing a yarmulke, any conclusion you draw from that is at the risk of anti-Semitism. So that's why to me it's negative. You got to be able to talk about it. People have to be able to draw their conclusions, and the more you try to get people to ignore the obvious, it makes conspiracy theories more likely.
Times article: Trump lawyer asked to pause impeachment trial if it runs into Sabbath. The request by Davidsson, one of former President Trump's lawyers, could upend plans for a fast trial. One of the lead defense lawyers for Mr. Trump has informed Senate leaders that he is an observant Jew who strictly adheres to the commandment against working on the Sabbath, and thus would be unable to participate in any proceeding that stretched past sundown on Friday or met on Saturday. Now, there are also ways for Jews to operate. For example, Jewish doctors work on Friday night and Saturday, and so if a Jew has an important government position, he can't abandon that position if necessary on the Sabbath if his duties require him to be on the job. Otherwise, an observant Jew could never participate in any important government position.
I would say almost a flip on that and say no, important doctors do not work on Sabbath. It's your mid-level doctors that are on call and don't have enough pull or say to not be able to work on Sabbath that have to work on Sabbath. So you might have, decent doctors that are making a few $100,000 a year, and they're on staff at a hospital, and they just can't get Sabbath off. And maybe the rabbis, whoever had ruled, but no, I mean, if you're a doctor who owns your own practice, an Orthodox Jew, there's almost no chance it's going to be open on Sabbath. And even though you could violate Sabbath to save a life, Orthodox Jews do not doctors do not openly, purposely practice on Sabbath. It's only because they have to. I mean, right? I'm sure I go to synagogue with plenty of doctors that have beepers and have to work on Sabbath. But I would say from, the chashivness that those doctors actually make less money. And the reason they have beepers is because they work for public hospitals and don't own their own practices.
So most doctors no longer own their own practices. That's increasingly rare. Most overwhelmingly doctors are employees. So I do notice with the more religious Jews that they will go to much greater length to get out of working on the Sabbath. But I know Jewish members of the LAPD or Jewish doctors, etc., who do work on the Sabbath. So if your job absolutely requires it, Orthodox Jews will do it, but they will, generally speaking, go to great lengths to try to switch places with somebody else.
It's good for the Jews to have Jews in good positions. So if you're in LA, there's not like a big push to have a bunch of ultra-Orthodox Jews that are perfect adherents with the halacha. So if you in LA, you have 1 million or 2 million Jews, and you're like an Orthodox Jewish police officer, you might be kind of like a hero, even though from a relative perspective, it's like there's no way there's legitimately a justification for you to be working on Sabbath. But in terms of what's better for the Jews, it's good for the Jews to have an Orthodox person on the police force, and the rabbis who have to make some sort of conclusion, might have some sort of greater ruling like that. The reason why Jews are so respected is probably related to the number of doctors we have in terms of money and the various things. But in terms of probably the main respect Jews bear in the community, it's probably because, all our doctors and dentists. And from that respect, the rabbis, however they make these rulings. So I would also say it's tiered also. So to say in a Haredi circle, no, that, it basically never happens. In the modern Orthodox circuit, it's it's not even a big deal. It's expected. And in LA, there might be circles of where you could daven and you could somewhat buy your way in and be respected. But at a certain point, say no, you're a doctor or you're a Jew. And I know that you being a doctor might garner respect among the Goyim. But no, we're not going to forgive you for the leniencies you're taking in your Judaism.
And what have been some of your more interesting discussions with Charles Moskowitz? You do a show weekly, I believe.
He knows a lot about history and a lot of subjects. So it's kind of talking with you, where there's just a wide-ranging topics. And he was a big, I even call a Trump shill basically. But for months it was Trump, and even after the election, he always wanted to talk about how the election was rigged and possibly stolen, and we talked about that, and I'm not a conspiracist, although I think that's just the natural point of patterns, and it's good to be skeptical, and it's good to try our own conclusions, and mandatory Holocaust education, and you're thinking well, of course people are going to get this information, and then they're going to make patterns that are logical according to their own head, which means they're going to take the information that they're given and they're going to try to compare it to what's going on according to their own understanding of today. And once you teach that, you can't really tell a person what comparisons are correct or not, because people make the patterns according to how they understand the world. And so what essentially they're saying is you understand the world incorrectly, and then it's just thought policing.
And what do you think about mandatory Holocaust education?
I think it's a bad idea because it just doesn't make sense. Like, that people know so much little information that's what you're going to insist people know. And then even you think like the Jew, as a Jew, saying that like you're going to meet somebody and like, oh, you're a Jew, like, I had mandatory Holocaust education. And then, that would assume like, let's, so like all I do is talk about the Holocaust. And like I said it with like I probably dedicated 5% of my life, academically, or at least, like talking, studying about World War II and the Holocaust. And you're saying like, well, I'm a Jew. That's just how it is. Everywhere you go, people are going to be like, oh, when I was a kid, I had mandatory Holocaust education. Like, can I ask you a few questions? And it's saying, is that, really what we want?
Yeah, I just don't see how there's anything about mandatory Holocaust education or Holocaust education in general that morally improves people or makes them, say, more observant of Torah. Plenty of people went through the Holocaust, and they generally came out with the same views of God and Torah that they took into the experience. Some people became secular, some people became religious, but there was no general trend. So I don't think there's anything inherent in studying about Auschwitz that makes somebody a better person. What do you think?
No, I mean, and God forbid it could be the opposite, because people, I don't know the opposite. You believe in free will and people know the depths of humanity, but people see that what's possible if you look like, oh, society isn't always that stable, and it's in like people hope towards revolution in order that they could change the direction of society. And I'm for education, but it's just like that people, that's the main thing they need to know. And I think the reason they're doing it is because they think it's going to push people that once they know this, they're of course going to make certain conclusions about, like multiculturalism or liberalism or whatever their conclusions that they think that knowing this information will cause people to make. But like, unfortunately, they're pretty blatantly wrong, that like having this information is not more likely to cause people to make the conclusion that, saying like, if you did some sort of test, I don't know if it's been tested, like, does Holocaust education cause people to be more pro or anti-immigration? And maybe there is a study that like people have Holocaust education are more likely to be pro-immigration, but even if that were the case, from the perspective like it's probably not enough. And there's going to be a lot of people that are going to draw other conclusions from the information, and then what are you going to do? You're going to tell people like, you're wrong. Now you're an anti-Semite, like someone who didn't even know the Holocaust existed, and now they know the Holocaust existed, but they're drawing a conclusion, God forbid, that's the opposite from what they want them to be taught. So now all of a sudden they can have anti-Semite and have to be stopped.
Yeah. So have you been reading any good books lately?
A whole bunch of them. Like, I'm reading these books on the science of expertise, and it's really interesting because there's been significant study related to sports performance. Like, I don't really care about the Super Bowl, but in terms of the understanding of like what it means to be really good at something, and how to coach that and how to measure it, that there's actually been phenomenal stuff. And as I said, chess is one of the major fields that's studied, and also doctors in medicine. The science of expertise is extensively studied. Doctors, what does it mean to be an expert surgeon in terms of like mistake ratios, and like from a scientific level, like I don't know, like running your show, monitoring the chat, just misclicks that or typos, that you could measure things like mistake ratios and have experts are accurate in the high 90s of percents, where the average person, and almost all fields have these in things like curriculum. So I found that pretty interesting. I might even do tomorrow, like I think I'm ready to put out my research on the Jewish view of reincarnation, and I actually read through the whole Arizal Shari Gilgolem, 36 chapters translated by Chabad with commentary, and it was pretty interesting. And like I've talked with Adam Green quite a few times, and then this question like, what do we really believe? And did you have Judas Maccabee on your channel?
No. I mean, he comes into the chat sometimes.
He still comes into your chat?
I mean, occasionally, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I've been talking to him on Facebook. Like, I was this guy who was watching Church of Entropy. I guess he wanted him like to debate me, but like I'm not sure if he's still doing that. But I mean, he's I guess in Israel, and like I was chatting with him, and it's a tough like. Is there what's the audience for an internal Jewish debate? So if we're gonna do it like for Goyim, and it may be counterproductive because they're gonna want to see both of us lose. And so it's just negative because they're gonna agree with everything bad that was said about both of us, or if we do it for an internal Jewish audience, then like is it really is there even a conversation? I forget why I brought him up, but it was really to a different point that you asked me about it.
I was asking you about what books you were reading.
Oh yeah, so I was reading the Arizal's Kabbalah. And so he was telling me like he doesn't believe in Kabbalah, and he doesn't think the Arizal's like as big as he's made up to be. He I guess he's Sephardi and he's a Maimonidean logician, and he said that he doesn't believe in reincarnation. And I was like, you reject the Arizal? And he was like, yes, I'm sorry, I do. And so that was why I was mentioning him. Yeah, so I'm trying to. I've been wrapping up my studies on reincarnation. And, I mentioned like Adam Green and these things, like, do we actually believe this stuff? So I said like, this guy, Judas Maccabee, was like, no, we don't actually believe this stuff. And I'm sure you're there in LA and there's a lot of people who go to the Kabbalah Center and they probably do believe in reincarnation. And they probably, really do find these books interesting. And I knew in Israel, I bet in LA that there's Kabbalist people that tell you the origins of your soul. And a lot of them are probably considered con men. I know in Israel and Brooklyn, there were rabbis that would send warnings of these Kabbalists coming to town, don't give them your money. But a lot of these Kabbalists that were supposedly con men, that is one of the things they did. They told people the origin of their soul in past lives. So to see like what role does that play in Judaism, and even examine the schools that were against it. I mean, do you have experience with that in LA? Have you met like some woman that was like, I just went to this Kabbalist and he told me I was this person in my past? You have seen that multiple times.
Yeah, I know that many, or at least one Chabad rabbi did Jewish astrology for outreach, because in Los Angeles in this time period, people are particularly self-absorbed. So if you offer people something that purports to give them insight into their souls, people tend to be very interested in themselves. So Jewish astrology is a possible way in for Kiruv, for Jewish outreach.
And your rabbinic con people, in the way that there's a lot of
yes,
Kabbalist con people in even LA, and some of them are extremely wealthy and profitable and have big followings, and they might even accept their opinions. Chabad rabbis, they're not going to tell you like, you were this person in the past life. They're going to say, yes, Jews do believe in reincarnation. It's an integral part of the general understanding of, the exile of the Jews and repair the world, which repair the world actually comes from the Arizal's concept of reincarnation. It's not, like the liberal activism more comes later. It's actually a term related to mostly reincarnation. But we talked about this in a whole bunch of fields, that your average Jew, especially the Jews that we're praying with, professionals, doctors, college educated, are pretty skeptical of our own superstitions. It's like, these are our superstitions. There might be some beauty and meaning to them, but like once you've had a rational scientific education, it's very difficult to take these superstitions seriously. But if you're an honest Jew and you live in a Jewish community, you know that 10 to 20% of people do take these seriously. So even Luke Ford is saying like, yeah, I've met a lot of Jewish women that told me that they thought they knew who they were in past lives.
Yeah. It's a lot of people will pay money to have a rabbi read their soul, so to speak. So yeah, it's a pretty common grift.
Would you just like not care? You're like, it didn't bother you that people are crazy. You just like, I don't really buy that, but like, I'm just gonna like let that move by and pretend like it didn't bother me, and we'll move on. Is that how you played those?
Yeah. No, I'm definitely not going to argue with someone about that. And it seems to me overwhelmingly Jews are going to take the COVID vaccine. What are you picking up about Jews and the COVID vaccine?
I wanted to mention to you the long-term picture out of Israel. And I assume Jews overwhelmingly will take the COVID vaccine. There might be a few ultra-Orthodox groups that don't, but they'll be minor. They might be driven. Even in Williamsburg, like Satmar, I would assume like well over 90% will take the vaccine. Although I wanted to mention, if you hadn't heard, that the Israeli COVID-19 experts have said a few things that are, I guess, somewhat not worrisome, but just factual, what to expect. And they said that Israel is not expecting to return to a regular international travel till 2024, with the basic reason that you can't have international travel till you have global herd immunity, which means like 4 billion people being vaccinated. And they suspect that will be a multiple year process, that even if Israel reaches herd immunity this year, that globally for international travel, don't expect till 2024. And then also Israel said that you don't expect that we should expect to be wearing masks. This is what they've told for Israelis for the whole of this year. And the problem is that you can't vaccinate children because of the health concerns. I guess they fast-tracked the research on vaccines, and the testing that needs to be done to conclusively show that vaccines are safe on children is going to take at least till the end of the summer with the already fast-track process. I mean, conceivably they could fast-track testing of the vaccines on children, but as of now, the testing to see if the vaccines are going to be safe enough on children won't be ready till the end of the summer. And because of that, you can't. The inability to vaccinate children, it's inconceivable we're going to reach herd immunity. And so Israel said to expect these partial lockdowns, even if Israel gets completely vaccinated through the end of this year. So if you hadn't heard that, I thought that was worth mentioning.
Okay, great. Dooovid, any final words for today?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I said on Week in Review because I've gotten so used to not dealing with people. I was almost scared of Week in Review. I was like, oh man, I don't really want to deal with these people. And I say COVID-19, these lockdowns. I was always kind of an introvert, but I used to, go to temple, synagogue, be involved in events. I used to even leave a regular Sunday Hare Krishna event to do Week in Review. But at this point, I deal with so few people that even coming on stream was oh man, I got to deal with people. So thanks for inviting me on. I got to stay sane and connected during these times. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely, good to catch up with you, Dooovid. Okay, here is something from.
We already have the winner for the worst article of 2021, and it's just February. The LA Times piece is titled, "What Can You Do About the Trumpets Next Door," or Trumpites, by writer Virginia Heffernan. She begins, "The Trumpites next door to our pandemic getaway," she has a pandemic getaway, "just plowed our driveway without being asked and did a great job." So after this good deed, did she leave a thank you note? No. She called the neighbor a bigot. Regarding her neighbor's generosity, Heffernan quotes a TV skit. "When white people are alone, they give things to each other for free." Then she adds, "Hezbollah, the Shiite Islamist political party in Lebanon, also gives things away for free." But she's not done yet. She saved the Hitler reference for last, rekindling a memory from a French family who once told her that Nazis were polite too. So what kind of creep decides to publicly denigrate kind neighbors? Either a really bad person who puts tribal politics before human kindness, or a fantasist. See, if her neighbor is pro-Trump, they probably watch Fox, and they'll recognize the name Virginia Heffernan and know that she compared them to Nazis. They should know that. But will they? I mean, if they exist. Really, what writer takes that chance to attack a next-door neighbor knowing they're vile Trump supporters and knowing that they could find out? The Times should have sent someone to her pandemic getaway to see if the driveway was cleared and also to get the neighbor's side of the story. So it's not just some rant that exudes superiority over a fantasy enemy. The editors should give this snowplower a chance to respond, or maybe admit they blew it and let a tall tale get by them because they wanted it to be true. So in sum, a person who makes up this story is bad. But if the story is true, it kind of makes her worse. Either way, hand her the shovel and let her dig out of this on her own. So, Geraldo, what gets me about this is, like, it's just, she knows the snowplower is a Trump supporter, but she gives no concrete evidence how that is. And if I were an editor, I would ask that and say, you need to have that in this article.
Well, I'm not sure now. Are you saying that she made up the article, or are you saying that she's just a bad reporter?
I don't know. Okay. I think that if she made it up, if she made it up, she's a fantasist. If it's real, then she's just an awful person. To do that to a neighbor.
When you start using Mussolini, Hezbollah, Nazis. I mean, it's a Hillary Clinton in the basket of deplorables. It's that arrogant elitism that I just can't stand. Mm-hmm. And they're mostly progressives, and they just irk me in a way that I can't begin. That's why, all due respect to John Kerry, that's one of the things I don't like. This kind of silver spoony. I'm smarter than you, and you're, here in Ohio. I'm surrounded by, this is Trump country, except for my little neighborhood here. But, nice people, solid citizens, good Americans. If the writers and the politicians of this country can't figure out those millions of people, then they're going to be, adrift in every way, emotionally, morally. It's so disheartening and anti-democratic. It's a small d. Back to you.
You know what Geraldo just nailed, Katie, is that this idea, this division is kind of a media contrivance that I live in a neighborhood where there are liberals on both sides of me, and we get along great. Mm-hmm. And everybody in the neighborhood, everybody's fine, everybody respects. So to me, this thing is something that is percolating in her head, and it's like, oh my God, they're at each other's throats, blah, 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 blah. Like, no, actually, we're normal human beings. We don't look at people like they're political animals.
So if this is true, the story that she wrote, she also says that she won the battle of lawn signs early on, right? So I imagine this is the kind of woman who has a hate doesn't live here sign right next to her dump Trump sign. So there's like conflicting statements about that. But there's good news for everybody. Mm-hmm. You no longer have to plow your neighbor's driveway. Just like assume they're going to hate you for your politics because they're political. So we just got everybody out of doing plowing. Like, good for her. You just got everyone out of plowing your neighbor's driveway. Just put a Trump sticker on your snowplow, and then no one will ask you to do anything.
There you go. So, Jesse, I'm still like, okay, if she just wrote this piece for the LA Times, she assumed that her neighbors don't know, her next-door neighbor doesn't know that she's a writer, will not know that she's calling him a bigot, or does he not exist? I'm trying to figure this out in real time.
Well, I would let Jeffrey Dahmer plow my driveway, Greg. I mean, shoveling snow is back-breaking kind of work. I can't relate to this woman at all, and it's mostly because the media has not brainwashed me into believing that my political opponent is a Nazi. Yes, if you believe Trump is a genocidal dictator and all of his supporters need to be brought up on war crimes, you're going to have a moral dilemma when they come over to shovel your driveway. But most of the people that voted for Trump voted for him because he wasn't crooked Hillary. Also because he was a celebrity businessman who put America first, but also he wasn't crooked Hillary. And wait till they find out, this woman, that a lot of these Trump supporters are also in the military, in the police departments, and in the fire departments, and that she actually needs Trump supporters more than Trump supporters need her.
I can't believe
Yeah.
I also, Greg, started thinking to myself in real time, like, are we missing something, or is there a backstory here? Had something happened in the past?
Yeah.
Did she have a particular way that she shoveled? And by the way, Jesse, not backbreaking when you're using a snowplow, which I think he did. Chairman of the Georgia Republican Party, I think this
No,
is
but she didn't have a plow.
This is an important tweet from the chairman of the Georgia Republican Party. This is a fascinating insight into how many on the left think the writer cannot.
Right. I couldn't imagine writing a column dissing my neighbor for their politics. Would somebody on the right do this? I don't think so.
Good in people with whom she disagrees politically. I mean, on a serious note, I think it's really important point that these calls for unity are out there. Let's all commit to them on both sides. The country needs to come together.
Yeah, the thing is, though.
Yeah, I was watching all the TV commercials last night, and I was deeply moved during the Super Bowl. I just feel like this country is finally ready to come together because of those wonderful commercials.
I don't know why she's obsessing about
a call to
Hezbollah.
unity. Yeah, that's a good point. But she said she claimed this was a call for unity, and then she compares them to Nazis. I think the point. I don't think any of us, if we were running a paper or at Fox, would have ran with this story. I would have to check it out first. I don't believe it. Or maybe I do believe it because she could be that awful. All right, ahead. A top union boss not happy with Joe Biden for killing thousands of jobs with his green agenda.
Anatomically correct.
Okay, so Steve Saylor is back from Twitter gulag. Let's see what's going on with Steve Saylor's tweets right now. He retweets Rob Henderson. The evidence suggests that when a prominent figure apologizes for a controversial statement, the public is either unaffected or becomes more likely to desire that the individual be punished. And then Steve Saylor says, I waited 2 full weeks. I'm back from Twitter gulag after 2 weeks. On January 25, Twitter told me I must delete 2 hateful tweets to be allowed back on Twitter unless I appealed, to which they promised to respond as soon as possible. I appealed. But 2 weeks later, no response. So his first hateful tweet pointed out that only 14 unarmed blacks were shot dead by cops in 2020, according to the Washington Post database. His banned tweet then mentions 3 famous Black Lives Matter martyrs, Michael Brown, Ahmaud Arbery, and Rashad Brooks, who were unarmed at the start of their confrontations, but who then grabbed for weapons, after which they were shot dead. My second tweet that was banned by Twitter as purportedly hateful referenced a January 13, 2021 National Review article, 2020 spike in urban homicides should not be a mystery. Obviously, it was the spike came about due to the Summer of George. Prior to George Floyd dying, there was not a spike in violent crime. Steve Saylor notes, I'm an anti-murder activist who attempts to raise awareness of the causes of 2020's record-shattering increase in murders, about 30% over 2019, probably more than double the previous worst ever increase in murders over the last 60 years. I try to point out the role of the establishment's rhetoric of racial hatred in having helped cause the thousands of extra murders seen during the racial reckoning of 2020. That this makes me seem hateful to tech monopolists is hardly surprising. I waited 2 full weeks for Twitter to respond as soon as possible to my appeal, but got no response. So I finally deleted the 2 tweets. We shall see if Twitter gets revenge for my posting screenshots of their censorship. So I dug up a video from 2007. I was at the Los Angeles Times Book Festival, and I got to ask Christopher Hitchens.
It expresses the sectarianism of the French Catholic Church.
Its
historical alignment with the anti-Semites, the army, and the elite.
I do believe
you go worship there if you like. That's the culture
now
to
we're
you,
bickering.
fine.
Now we're bickering. All right. I do believe Notre Dame is a medieval cathedral.
Yes, around which Thomas Aquinas once flew, you may be interested to know. He levitated all around. We have the witnesses. After leaving one of his books on the high altar to be reviewed by God and receiving, by channeling a favorable review, he flew in delight around the nave of Notre Dame. You can check it out. And many people think that's culture.
Christopher, I warned you I was here to protect Jonathan.
Okay.
All right, let's take some questions from the audience. Let me just remind you, I'll ask the people who are standing at the microphones. It's very important for you to know, and this is a moderator's prerogative. I have very little power in the world, but this is it. I would like you to ask questions. This is not here to provide a speech or to provide for some kind of political message that you have. It's a question that is addressed to our panelists and that are somewhat consistent, hopefully consistent with the description of the panel for today. Yes, you, sir.
Mr. Hitchens, how come it took the most religious country in the Western world to rescue your pretty secular country, Britain, from 2 world wars, and to be the bulwark against communism, and now to lead the fight against Islam?
Very good question. I mean it. I did correct it in 2 ways. In my country of birth, by the way, let me just say this for the first time. I've been waiting to say it for weeks. My fellow Americans. I took, if you'll allow me, I took my oath at the Jefferson Memorial in Washington on the 13th of April, which is his birthday and mine. And I remind you that he's the author of the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, which is the basis of the First Amendment to the Constitution, which makes America a secular country, not a religious one. The only country in the world that says that religion is no business of the state. And this has had to be defended several times from religious secessionists who wanted to ruin the Union, from those who wanted to impose prohibition, from those who imposed slavery and segregation in the name of the Bible, to those who want garbage taught in the schools now. It's an ongoing battle to keep that Constitution the way it is. In my country of birth, the Queen is the head of the church, and everyone has to pay money, whether they want to or not. When she dies, her son will become the slobbering, chinless sympathizer of Islam, a witless dauphin who goes to the mosque these days, will become the head of the church. That's what you get when you build a church on the family values of Henry VIII. For all that, I think England was worth saving, so thanks.
You, sir.
Thank
no,
you.
I was asking that gentleman.
I'll be very brief. It's
No,
important.
No, it's okay.
Go away. Go away. Go away. We don't want fascist crackpots taking up our meeting. Thank you. Go away. Go away.
Different panel.
Fascist crackpot.
Different.
Fascist crackpot.
Different
We're
panel.
not here to talk to you. Throw him out.
Sir.
Throw him out.
Here, sir.
Throw him out. No.
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 I have exercised my discretion as a moderator. Could you please sit down and?
Sir.
Let him ask the question. I don't think you're going to shut him up.
No. Come, bring it on.
It's about the
This
subject?
gentleman has the floor.
Okay.
Security. Security, please.
So some 9/11
Out you
truther.
go. Go away. No.
Sir, why don't you ask your...
Sir?
Okay, that was my brief moment in the sun. All right, here is a recent podcast with Michael Beckley on China and Taiwan and all that good stuff. So
on this at the end, it's an aggressive response. Welcome, Professor Beckley. Thanks for joining our show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So your 2018 book was titled Unrivaled, Why America Will Remain the World's Sole Superpower. And I was curious, do you think that's still the case? As the U.S., we've struggled this year through this pandemic, and China has long emerged from it.
Yeah, I think the overall trends still hold. I understand a lot of people think China has emerged relatively unscathed from COVID. I actually don't really buy that because I know Chinese statistics and I know how easily and how often they're doctored. And so I would assume the COVID cases, as well as the economic damage, is a lot worse than what the Chinese government's reporting. And one of my colleagues at AEI, Derek Scissors, has done a ton of research to basically back up those claims. But I think more broadly, the balance of power is not going to shift just because of COVID. And while I think China certainly is extremely powerful, it's clearly the second most powerful country in the world. If you look at just the key metrics of what makes a country a superpower, China still lags pretty far behind the United States. The United States has 3 to 4 times China's wealth, 5 to 10 times its military capabilities, depending on which type of capabilities you're talking about. And the U.S. has dozens of allies, whereas China's only ally is North Korea. The U.S. dollar is very much the global reserve currency. It's used in 90% of international financial transactions. China's is only used in 2%. And then if you look at things like soft power, of course, America's soft power has taken a beating recently, but most people in most countries still favor the United States over China. So with gaps this big in money and military muscle and alliances and partnerships, you can't really consider China a superpower in the same league as the United States, at least not yet.
Right. During the Trump years, I mean, you say we took a beating in soft power. A lot of people were very concerned about pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the trade deal that we were on the verge of reaching, because they said that would allow China to strengthen its.
Okay, so I think it's pretty obvious vis-a-vis Christopher Hitchens that he did not answer my question. So he talks about religion as this force that destroys the vitality of countries, but I just don't think there's any necessary correlation. Sometimes religion may act to make countries less aggressive. Other times, religion may make people more aggressive. I don't think there's any definitive trend in any political or military or even cultural direction. Christianity, for example, is almost infinitely flexible.
And in the region, President Trump very clearly, very explicitly was pulling back from international alliances. Do you think China is gaining on us? Did they gain on us in the last 4 years?
I think we handed China an opportunity on a silver platter, and they basically dropped the ball. They seem to have gone out of their way to antagonize pretty much all of their major neighbors and potential partners. So anti-China sentiment, and this is according to both leaked internal Chinese documents as well as broader surveys by research groups like Pew, show that anti-China sentiment globally hasn't been this high since the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. And, a lot of this is, of course, coming out of COVID and people blaming China for COVID, but also China's reaction, where they've kind of gone on the offensive with the so-called wolf warrior diplomacy, threatening to cut countries off from critical medical supplies if they don't toe the Chinese line. And then, of course, doing all of the things that has really been going on for the past decade, if not longer, with whether it's militarizing features in the South China Sea, reabsorbing Hong Kong, pressuring Taiwan, stirring up trouble with India on their shared border. So China really has had a much more aggressive and assertive foreign policy.
Right. So this is Michael Beckley. He writes in Foreign Affairs magazine, December 17, 2020, competition with China could be short and sharp. Risk of war is greatest in the next decade. So in foreign policy circles, it has become conventional wisdom the United States and China are running a superpower marathon that may last a century, but the sharpest phase of that competition will be a decade-long sprint. And we're in that right now. So we may very well be in a battle over Taiwan at any time. The Sino-American contest for supremacy won't be settled anytime soon. Yet history and China's recent trajectory suggests that the moment of maximum danger is just a few years away. China has entered a particularly perilous period as a rising power. It has gained the capability to disrupt the existing order, but its window to act may be narrowing. The balance of power has been shifting in Beijing's favor in important areas of U.S.-Chinese competition, such as the Taiwan Strait and the struggle over global telecommunications networks. Yet China is also facing a pronounced economic slowdown and a growing international backlash. The good news for the United States is that over the long term, competition with China may prove more manageable than many pessimists believe. Americans may one day look back on China the way they now view the Soviet Union, as a dangerous rival whose evident strengths concealed stagnation and vulnerability. The bad news is that over the next 5 to 10 years, the pace of Sino-American rivalry will be torrid, and the prospect of war frighteningly real as Beijing becomes tempted to lunge for geopolitical gain. The United States still needs a long-term strategy for protracted competition, But first, it needs a near-term strategy for navigating the danger zone. So we are in a danger zone right now with our relationship with China.
And in a lot of ways, China is sort of catalyzing its own containment. You see so many countries now turning either to their neighbors to try to balance against China or even looking for U.S. support. So while I agree the United States shot itself in the foot, I think China also did and didn't really seize this opportunity to win hearts and minds that it probably could have.
You recently wrote a paper that competition with China could really heat up in the next decade and, in fact, could lead to war. Paint me a scenario where that happens.
Yeah, so I think the reason why I think the next 5 to 10 years could be a period of maximum danger is that China has entered a really perilous period in the life of a rising power. So it's acquired a tremendous amount of capability to disrupt various aspects of the international order. I think.
And I'm looking at the uncensored chat over on DLive, and there's a complaint against the religions that the Jews engineered. These religions destroy countries, cultures, and the genetic individuality of each ethnic group. You pollute with your cursed scroll, referring to the Torah. Yours and all the fake religions you spawned, meaning Christianity and Islam, are completely based on arbitrary good and evil. There's nothing rooted in truth in it. It's an inversion of nature, says the commentator Shadow of the Beast. Well, guess what? All definitions of good and evil are arbitrary. Any notion of some transcendent code of good and evil depends upon a subjective leap of faith to a transcendent source. Unless you can base a code of good and evil on a transcendent source, or you have our opinions. So where are you going to get a transcendent code for morality for all of humanity? Right? You're only going to be able to get that with a leap of faith that some transcendent source issued a code of morality. So all moral systems depend upon that arbitrary leap of faith. So you can make an arbitrary leap of faith to Judaism, Christianity, to Islam, to any moral system you want, but it all depends upon an arbitrary and partly subjective leap of faith. So you think you can get a system of good and evil based on nature, but people can understand nature in 57 different ways. Nature does not produce a clear code of good and evil. You can't base principles on laws. Good has its roots in nature. Okay, so where's the objective statement of good and evil from nature? Where do we find this? Nature is vast, and there are vast numbers of moral implications that one can derive from nature, but there's not some kind of objective code. So you're delusional if you think you can get an objective code of good and evil from nature. Like where? Where is it written? People look at nature and they come up with 57 different moral systems based on nature. There's no objectivity to it. It's purely subjective. You have your interpretation of nature and somebody else has their interpretation of nature. And so in nature, one interpretation is that only the fit survive. So if we apply that to human life, then do we not help anybody? Do we not take care of people who are old or people who are sick or people who are vulnerable? Good and evil is based on good practices that are a result of thousands of years of generative benefits. This is just gobbledygook that I understand you get it from National Socialism. And so you think this is some kind of objective code of good and evil, but it's entirely subjective. Which good practices? And where are these objective standards of good and evil to be found? You read, something into nature, and other people read different things into nature, but it's all subjective. It's all contains considerable elements of arbitrariness and subjectivity. So if you want to have a universal transcendent moral code, you have to make some kind of leap of faith. You're not going to generate an objective moral code from nature. And if you believe you can, then where's it written? Where do we find it?
Especially the military balance with Taiwan has been shifting in China's favor. But at the same time, I think Chinese leaders are looking ahead and they see a worsening economic picture with slowing growth and then this demographic crisis that's going to hit them. And they also see the anti-China sentiment spreading around them and countries starting to build up their own militaries and sign economic deals that are essentially excluding China. And so the worry is that China's leaders will say, well, hey, we have this window of opportunity to accomplish all the big aims that we want to accomplish, to make China whole again, to do something like take Taiwan back. And we don't have infinite time. We actually need to make these things happen sooner rather than later. I actually think that explains a fair amount of the reason why China has been, say, ramping up pressure over Taiwan with the most provocative display of force we've seen in the last 25, 30 years.
All right, so much of the debate about China and Washington's policy towards China focuses on the dangers that China will pose as a peer competitor later this century. Yet the United States actually faces a more pressing and more volatile threat, an already powerful but insecure China beset by slowing growth and intensifying hostility abroad. So who are China's big allies? China only has one ally, North Korea. That's it. China's like the alt-right. So who were the alt-right's allies? The alt-right didn't generate any allies. The main figures in the alt-right didn't concern themselves with making allies. The main figures in the alt-right, generally speaking, did not behave in a way that generated allies. They instead behaved in a way that made the creation of and maintenance of alliances absolutely impossible. So China and the alt-right, in that respect, have a lot in common. They are generally loathed, and they have virtually no allies.
So I think the scenario for war that worries me is, in fact, the Taiwan contingency, because Xi Jinping has made clear that he wants to see reunification happen under his watch. Essentially, the Chinese people feel very strongly that they want to take back Taiwan, and they see this military balance that right now looks pretty favorable for them, but maybe further down the line with all the action on Capitol Hill about the U.S. strengthening its commitment to Taiwan, selling it more arms, and the U.S. also reestablishing its military deterrent in East Asia, I think China says, well, maybe now is the time to start.
And looking at the DLive chat, yes, of course, we take care of our old and weak, but we don't promote the weak to generate and the strong to perish because we're all equal. Okay, so you are generating your particular morality from your understanding of eugenics and your understanding of nature. But there's nothing objective and transcendent about this. You look at nature and you come away with certain subjective, this is your leap of faith. You've taken this leap of faith that what you are advocating is moral. And 57 other people can look at nature and come up with their own perspectives on what is moral. So all you do is have a variety of individual opinions. There's no transcendent moral code that different people can reference and discuss. Are things good because God says they are, or are they genuinely good? Well, what does it mean, genuinely good? Unless you have a transcendent source to say that something is good, then it's purely a matter of opinion. There's no such thing as inherently good. Good is subjective to each person's opinion unless you have a transcendent source to declare something good. The only way you can have something objectively good is if you take a subjective leap of faith to a transcendent source of morality who declares it's good. So Richard Spencer said he was going to quit Twitter, but he came back for the Super Bowl. And Richard notes, Tom Brady hasn't just won a game, he has overcome time and achieved eternally lasting fame. Men, whether leaders, generals, artists, or emperors, men who grasp at greatness are great themselves even if they fail. Those men who actualize every man's dreams are, simply put, God. So this is the romantic thinking that Richard Spencer embodies. So where we go. So to be romantic in your thinking, it means that you see more to reality than's actually there. So, of course, we all understand that Richard isn't really tweeting about Tom Brady. He's tweeting about himself. So I propose the hypothesis using inductive logic. So looking for the simplest inference that otherwise explains otherwise mystifying behavior by Richard Spencer. And very simple hypothesis is that Richard will do and say anything that will achieve him the maximum of attention. So he's not really talking about Tom Brady here. So this tweet is, Richard Spencer hasn't just won a game. Richard Spencer has overcome time and achieved eternally lasting fame. People like Richard Spencer, whether leaders, generals, artists, or emperors, people like Richard Spencer who grasp at greatness are great themselves, even if they fail. So Richard, no matter how often he completely humiliates himself, he understands himself as great. And this is the kicker in the last sentence. Men like me, men like Richard Spencer, who actualize every man's dreams, are simply put gods. So Richard is explicitly saying that Tom Brady is a god, but what he's really saying is that Richard Spencer is a god and should not be held accountable to the same moral standards of everybody else.
I am so mad. I am so fucking mad at these people. They don't do this to fucking me. We're gonna fucking ritualistically humiliate them. I am coming back here every fucking weekend if I have to. Like, this is never over. I win. They fucking lose. That's how the world fucking works. Little fucking kites. They get ruled by people like me. Little fucking octoroons. My ancestors fucking enslaved those pieces of fucking shit. I rule the fucking world. Those pieces of shit get ruled by people like me. They look up and see a face like mine looking down at them. That's how the fucking world works. We are gonna destroy this fucking...
Okay, so Richard is back on Twitter. After making an announcement Friday, he was stepping away. And Michael Tracy has a tweet. Tom Brady hopped off the Trump train in 2016 after he got caught with a MAGA hat in his locker. He didn't attend the White House victory ceremony in 2017. Patriots then had no ceremony at all in 2019. That's why Brady's a proven winner. He knows when to bail before things go south. And back to my interlocutor on the D-Live chat. So he asks, are things good because God says they are, or are they genuinely good? And I pointed out there's no way of discerning what is objectively, genuinely good unless you have a transcendent source for that opinion. Otherwise, everybody just has an opinion. That's all you've got. So, of course, things are only objectively, transcendently good if God says so. And Shadow of the Beast responds, there you go. You're unable to identify and call out evil on your own. I do that all the time. You can identify and call out evil on your own, bro, without God. It's just your subjective opinion. There's no transcendent power behind it. You're just sharing your opinion. So go out there and call out evil all you want and feel like you're being magnificent. All you're sharing is your subjective opinion. So some people prefer vanilla ice cream. Other people prefer strawberry ice cream. Other people prefer chocolate ice cream. And you share your subjective opinion on your favorite flavors of ice cream and your favorite versions of morality. All you can share is your subjective opinion. And guess what? Not many people care about your subjective opinion. The only moral teachings that have force... No. Moral teachings have a particular force when you can ascribe them to something more powerful than your opinion. And that you ascribe it to nature, that's not particularly convincing because people look at nature and come up with an infinite number of opinions. So the Shadow of the Beast has opinions on what is evil, and he believes that he's doing powerful work by calling out evil. He's unable to accept reality, and that all he's doing is sharing his opinion, which is no more binding on anyone else than his opinion on his favorite forms of music or his favorite forms of ice cream. And he says, morality is in the blood, in the family traditions, and in nature. Yeah, but why would anyone else take that seriously? Right? It's just entirely subjective on your part. People will deduce any moral system they want from their blood and from their family traditions and in nature. Or you're getting at different people's subjective individual opinions. So why would anyone pay attention to your individual subjective opinion? You can ascribe it to your blood. You can ascribe it to nature. You can ascribe it to the New York Times or the Radix Journal. But so what? It's just your individual opinion. You're not able to point to some kind of transcendent objective source. LOL, it's not an opinion. It's out there. Okay, so show me how it's binding and objective. because other people can look at the exact same things that you're pointing out, blood, nature, family traditions, and they will come up with their own opinions. So all you can offer them is Shadow of the Beast is willing to call out evil and share his opinion on what is evil. And you think that that's going to have a powerful impact on the world, as opposed to someone who can point to, say, a shared transcendent source of morality. That's what Jews and Christians have with the Bible. Now, these are some ultra-Orthodox Jews protesting against COVID restrictions in Israel. They're attending a rabbi's funeral. Okay, let's go back to my DLive interlocutor. Good is like beauty. On the border, it has many variations to many different tastes, but at the core, it has a genuine objective component because it is based on nature, God. Okay, give me where the objective component is found. Like, point to me, where's the text? Where's the objective text that is objective? And you can't, because it doesn't exist. You want to believe that you believe in objective morality. You want to believe that your morality is just very clear, and that once people notice it, that they're not going to be able to oppose it. But all it is boils down to is your opinion. You can't point to it. You can't, oh, here's the objective standard. Like, you can point to a tree all you want. You can point to your DNA test all you want, but nobody else finds that particularly objective, transcendent, or compelling. So you have this fantasy that you can call out evil, but all you can call out is, oh, I feel this is evil. And you may be able to recruit some people or make common cause with people who view things similarly, but unless people already take a subjective leap of faith to your particular perspective, there's no objectivity here. All you've got are your own individualist opinions. And guess what? 99.999% of the world doesn't give a damn about my opinions or your opinions. What much of the world cares about, however, is if you can show that morality is based in some transcendent source such as God.
Right, if we ever going to. I don't think war is likely, but it's become more likely than I'm frankly comfortable with. And so that's why I just worry about the next 5 to 10 years for U.S.-China relations. It's kind of like in the early Cold War, where you had really big flashpoints and almost brought us to major catastrophe and major war, and then things sort of settled into a period of détente later on. So I could see something similar happening with the U.S.-China relationship, where the next 5 to 10 years are going to be, it's going to be pretty torrid, and then hopefully we can settle into, it'll still be a competitive relationship, but it doesn't have to necessarily be nail-biting kind of conflict scenarios.
We've long guaranteed Taiwan's security. A war with China could be catastrophic. Should we maintain that policy of guaranteeing Taiwan's security at all costs? Or should there be limits to it?
Yeah.
Of course, we should not guarantee Taiwan's security at all costs. Back to DLive. You don't need the text, LOL. All you need to understand is the principles of things by not being so superficial about life. Okay, so where is their objective agreement? Where are these objective principles? Where can you point to them? Where are they written up? Well, you said, okay, they're not written up. You know that they're not a text. So there's an objective reality, and then individuals bring their subjective understanding of the morality of that situation. So all you have is your subjective opinion about objective morality, and nobody is going to care because you consider life as toil. I don't consider life as toil. The Jewish perspective on the purpose of life is to enjoy it. So you don't know much about Judaism. You don't know much about a lot of things, but don't let that slow you down, because it's a lot easier to be really certain when you don't know anything. So the rise of the warrior apes, if you want to get a more subjective analysis, know about how the apes handle these things, then check out this documentary, Rise of the Warrior Apes. It's on Amazon. So
Within
they
about
have
a year and a
strict
half
hierarchies.
of when Lofty had won against Moya, Bartok won against Lofty and became the alpha male.
Well, you could tell because Lofty would come up to Bartok and Pangrunt. Those chimps who play that game of just sheer power never seem to last very long at the top spot.
So I believe in God. I believe in an objective standard of good and evil. It's found in the Torah and the ongoing rabbinic tradition, but I don't reference it, generally speaking, for discussions on this show because I want to create a show that anyone can participate in, whether they're atheist, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, whatever their perspective. So for the way the real world works as far as international relations, I think that the best metaphor is we're all locked in an iron cage together and there's no higher authority. All right? So if your drug deal with a rival gang goes bad, you can't go to the police. You can't go to the courts. And that's how international relations work. If the United States has a conflict with China, there's no higher authority who's going to arbitrate or send the countries to their separate corners. So when it comes to international relations, when it comes to relations between states or between warring tribes, the metaphor I prefer is we are all locked in an iron cage. There's no escape. There's no help coming. There's no higher authority. Right? Often life boils down to win, lose, kill or be killed. Sometimes you're going to be the concentration camp guard. Other times you're going to be the concentration camp inmate.
It's the guys who have the social smarts and they're able to develop, these social relationships with others. And
what about the Hague of the United Nations? International institutions have no power. They don't really matter much for how the real world works. The primary duty of every state is to stay alive, is to survive. And when a state implements defensive measures, these defensive measures are frequently going to be interpreted by neighboring states as offensive, threatening measures. So one state thinks that they're just improving their own defense, but by improving your defense, that's going to come across as threatening to opposing states, because if you got an improved defense, that gives you more freedom to go on the offensive. We can never fully know another person's intentions. That's why marriages break up all the time. So it may start out really lovey-dovey, but we don't know other individuals' intentions, how those intentions will change when circumstances change. We don't know the intentions of neighboring states. And so the number one duty for a nation state is to try to survive. Given that you don't know the intentions of other states, it is your primary duty to become as strong and powerful as possible. But as you become stronger and more powerful, you then become more threatening to the states around you, who then have incentives to form balancing coalitions against you. So this is the tragedy of great power politics, to quote the title of the magnum opus by Professor John J. Mearsheimer.
We turn out to last much longer in the alpha position.
But he did very, very well. He was a very long-tenured alpha male. A lot of these really big-bodied males who were really the most aggressive ones out there at the time.
Okay, so we're all locked in an iron cage together. Back to the D-Live chat. Shadow of the Beast says, so according to the Torah, genociding other people, the creator of everything created, is a good thing because someone said he heard a voice say so behind a curtain. Well, remember, let's forget the Torah. Let's forget God. All right, so the only objective way you have for stating that genocide is bad or murder is bad or rape is bad or torture is bad is you've got to ascribe it to some transcendent source. There's no objective morality without a transcendent source of morality. All you have are individual opinions. So you may think that torture is a bad thing or rape is a bad thing. That's just your subjective opinion. So if you believe that murder is objectively bad, then you have to believe in God. There's no other basis for believing that murder is objectively bad. Otherwise, all you have are subjective opinions. So in the Torah, Moses says that God said to him to commit genocide. We don't have God directly saying, go commit genocide in the Torah. But what we do have is Moses at various times saying, go commit genocide. So you'll find this in Deuteronomy 7. So Deuteronomy 7, nationalism. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess and drive out before you many nations, and when God has delivered these many nations over to you and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally, make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. So yes, the Torah says that God said to Moses, go commit genocide. There's a huge variance in morality, but there are a couple of things all non-psychopaths recognize as sad, unfair behavior that gives people the creeps. There is no universal morality that exists objectively. All moral systems are dependent upon a particular time and a particular place. You can't handle a harsh truth, that you cannot say that murder is wrong unless you can ascribe that commandment to God. Like reality is like too painful for you, so you want to live in a world of delusion that there's this wonderful objective morality that you can ascribe to blood, to nature, to family traditions. But I ask you, okay, point to it. Where can I see it? Where is it written up? And it's like, oh no, it doesn't exist. It's just this general morality that all good people hold. But all you've got there are just individual opinions. You don't have any objective standards. Evil is an inversion of nature. That's just your opinion. Look, I get it that reality is too harsh for you to handle. I get it that this very simple understanding that murder is not wrong unless God says murder is wrong. I get that that's painful for you, because I get that believing in God would impose moral restrictions on you that you don't want to live by. Right? If you accept reality that murder is not wrong unless God says so, you would have to radically reconfigure your life. You'd have to stop doing a whole bunch of things that you are doing right now. You would be knocked off your haughty throne. You would have to go into a deep period of introspection. And a lot of the things that you enjoy doing right now, you would no longer be able to do. So I get it. You might even lose your mind if you understood the very simple fact that murder, torture, rape are not wrong unless there's an objective source saying that they are wrong. So I understand that this is hard. I understand that this is psychologically disturbing and that you've got to block it out. Because if you were to grapple with these simple elementary truths, it would force you to completely reconfigure your life. And who wants to change their life? You love your life, and you love being free to do anything that you want to do that you feel like you can get away with and that you can somehow ascribe to nature, to blood, and to family traditions. So I get why you've got this block at realizing elementary truths that unless God says murder is wrong, murder's not wrong. Do the apes go around doing whatever they want? They've got some sense of cooperation and humans have extended it. Yes, they have, but there's nothing objective to it. You can't... What you're saying is that apes and other animals and human beings in different places develop different mores. And that's absolutely right. If you're wandering through the jungle and realize you're being stalked by a big gorilla, would you attack first? It would depend on the circumstances. We have to agree to a creed on faith, as you say, but it comes from instinct. Yeah, that makes sense. Deuteronomy also teaches you how to set up international banking in Deuteronomy 15:6. Reality is harsh. You just have to endure it. Harshness isn't always evil. But Ford, you don't even believe in God. I believe in God. I believe in God, but I'm not basing much of the geopolitical analysis of this show on a subjective leap of faith that many of the viewers of this show are not going to hold. I deliberately set this show in a type of discussion where it does not depend on any particular leap of faith. So this show is open to atheists, to agnostics, to people of any perspective, because on this show, when we're looking at international politics and group conflicts, we're primarily just going to look at things objectively without reference to a leap of faith. No, you are completely cut from your own nature through years of Torah and Talmud brainwashing. How am I completely cut from my own nature? I'm referencing an Amazon documentary, The Rise of the Warrior Apes. I do this show day in, day out on overwhelmingly a purely naturalistic basis, because on a naturalistic basis, I can talk to anybody, all right? We can just talk about incentives. We can just talk about reality without reference to any leap of faith. So I'm able to talk to atheists, and I'm able to talk to people from any perspective because I pitch this show on a naturalistic basis. And when I step outside of that naturalistic basis, I try to make clear, okay, now I'm going to take my subjective leap of faith. Now, if I'm talking to people who share my subjective leap of faith, if I'm talking to people within Orthodox Judaism, I'm going to speak a different code, right? I code switch on this show. I don't speak on this show the exact same way I speak when I'm with my Orthodox Jewish friends, because it's a different language. It's a different way of looking at life. So if you didn't believe in God, you would kill people? No, absolutely not. But I would recognize the reality that murder is not objectively, transcendently wrong without a moral referent who is transcendent.
Helped him maintain his alpha status. And those were the guys who ensured that he stayed in power. Really, I think it was some of these other males who were more keen on hunting and patrolling than Bartok was.
Ellington was an amazing character.
He didn't seem too concerned with being number one in the hierarchy, but all the other chimps seemed to really like him. He was really well respected. There'll be, 20 chimps sitting around, grooming one another, relaxing. And then one chimpanzee will get up and start walking in that direction. That chimpanzee was Ellington.
There was a famous Hasidic rabbi in the 19th century who told his students everything has a purpose. And one of his students asked, well, what about atheism? Does atheism have a purpose? And the rabbi said, yes, when you see a poor person or a needy person, you should help him as though there was no God in heaven to help him. So yes, there's a lot to be learned from a purely naturalistic perspective on life. There's a lot to be learned from atheism and from atheists and from agnostics. I welcome truth from any source. Student says, God is a concept by which we measure our pain. And let me have a look at the chat. Shadow of the Beast says, murder is not objectively evil. And Fringe Wire says, forward, in a world where God doesn't exist, could society still exist? Would you allow killing in some circumstance? Well, there's murder and killing are two different words for two very different activities. So murder is immoral killing. Sometimes killing is moral, sometimes killing is immoral. So sometimes sex is moral and sometimes sex is immoral. Rape, for example, is immoral sex. Now, I don't believe that belief in God is necessary to be a good person. Japan is overwhelmingly a non-theistic nation, has much lower crime rates than any Christian nation of which I'm aware, or any Jewish, compared to the Jewish nation. Right. So we're all locked in an iron cage together, and the way human beings relate to hierarchy, to group conflict, to aggression, very similar to the way these warrior apes react. Back to a podcast with Michael Beckley, author of Unrivaled, about how America will be even more powerful in the 21st century than it is right now.
So I think, the current policy is not to guarantee Taiwan's security at all costs. It's, it's strategically ambiguous, right? So the United States, it's U.S. law that the U.S. has to help Taiwan acquire the articles it may need to help defend itself. But what the United States would actually do if China attacked Taiwan is left sort of ambiguous. Now, there's a lot of people, especially on Capitol Hill, saying we need to change that. We need an unambiguous Taiwan policy. I don't know how, I could see arguments on both sides in terms of standing U.S. policy. What I do think needs to happen is the U.S. needs to rapidly improve its deterrence in East Asia, and especially over the Taiwan Strait, because right now the United States military is very vulnerable. We only have 2 air bases within 500 miles of Taiwan. So if China were to take those out, we'd be operating from Guam, 1,800 miles away from Taiwan, and be having to sail ships in from hundreds, maybe even thousands of miles away. So that could be a recipe for disasters.
And on the DLive chat, there's the question, how does murder work in a godless universe? It's a social mores. So groups get together and they decide what is right and wrong. And then if you want to prosper in that particular group, then you will abide by the standards of the group. So it's not necessary to be a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim to be a good person. Societies have dealt with right and wrong and ethics and murder and rape and torture. They've evolved their own moral codes, and people who want to belong to the society have generally had to abide by those moral codes. So frequently you'll find non-theistic societies such as Japan having much lower murder rates than theistic societies. So it's not like belief in God necessarily makes people more moral. And Shadow of the Beast says, getting rid of the people who are a detriment to your community, such as by exile, is perfectly justifiable. It's common sense. Yeah. So human beings operate in a very similar way to the warrior apes. They just use different rhetoric. Does reality closely match social mores, or does it match murder being a commandment by God? That is a good question, and I am not at all sure. So I used to, in my more naive days, when I was a new, fresh convert to Judaism, I used to think that the most important thing in the world was for people to believe that there was a God-given transcendent source of morality. And then over time, I realized that there are other things that have much more effect on the morality of how people behave. Primarily, seems to me, just based on reality, the primary thing that determines the moral level of how people behave is their level of connection. So people who feel connected to other people overwhelmingly tend to behave in what would generally be regarded as moral at a far greater level than people who say believe in God, believe in the Torah, believe in a transcendent source of morality, but are generally disconnected from others. So it seems to me the primary determinant of whether people will behave in a pro-social way is whether they feel a connection to other people. If they have a vibrant sense of connection to other people in their lives, that seems to be much more influential on the moral character of people's behavior as compared to what they believe about God.
So I think making a commitment to Taiwan is important because, it is that unsinkable aircraft carrier off of China's coast. It's also the world's only Chinese democracy. And so there's ideological reasons we should support Taiwan, as well as technological reasons. Taiwan is a leader in producing semiconductors and other high technology equipment. So for a variety of reasons, I think the U.S. has a strong interest in protecting Taiwan. It doesn't have to be unambiguous, but the deterrent that is backing up whatever U.S. commitment is there has to be solid. And right now I worry it's not very solid.
Talk about that a little bit more. What's the danger if we were to allow China to take over Taiwan?
Well, I think first of all, right now, preparations for a Taiwan contingency probably consume a third or so of China's entire military modernization. So if they're able to take Taiwan, not only will they have this new unsinkable aircraft carrier to project power out into the Western Pacific, use it as a staging location for putting blockades or putting pressure on, say, the Philippines or Japan, but it also just allows China to redeploy assets that it currently has to keep trained on Taiwan further afield. And so it's kind of the initial breakout point within the first island chain for China to start imposing itself on the rest of the region. I think in addition, it also takes the heat off the Chinese Communist Party from a legitimacy perspective, because right now, the fact that you have this prosperous, democratic, alternative Chinese government sitting there in Taiwan, of course, is a huge problem for the CCP. It can make them look bad. They have to worry that their own people will get.
And looking at the DLive chat question, should people be like Dexter and take out the trash? I don't think I'm allowed to answer that honestly by terms of service for various social media platforms, but I think I've only watched part of an episode of Dexter, but he seemed to only take out bad people. So from the little I know about Dexter, it seems like he was doing God's work. And another question, another comment in the chat over on YouTube. It says, what about all the vile statements in the Talmud? Well, every in-group says vile things about out-groups. So the Talmud's not unique in that. There are lots of vile things about Christianity in the sacred texts of Judaism. There are lots of vile things about Jews and Judaism within the sacred texts of Christianity. Now, I remember one rabbi said, well, the difference is that the Christian vile comments were often associated with genocidal thought, and the Jewish vile comments about Christianity were not associated with genocidal thought. So I don't know if there is a significant difference in the vileness of the hatred between these two religions in their sacred texts. And of course, vileness is considerably subjective.
Certain ideas that they want government in the same way. And so again, you're freeing up the Chinese Communist Party to go and push its weight around in other areas and in other regions. So I think for a variety of reasons, a lot of people call it the cork in the bottle, and I think there's a lot of truth behind that.
Is it worth a potential nuclear conflict?
I think the key, here's where the argument is, well, if you abandon Taiwan, will that make nuclear war less likely further on? Because obviously nobody wants a nuclear war, and China at the end of the day cares a lot more about Taiwan than the United States does. But I think the idea is sometimes you have to be more aggressive in the short term in order to prevent further destabilizing spirals of hostility later on. Anyone thinks that China is going to stop at Taiwan, I think hasn't been paying attention to Chinese foreign policy, hasn't been reading Chinese foreign policy talk.
And looking at the DLive chat, there are a lot worse things than trash talking in the Talmud. I love all these people who've done almost no study of the Talmud, lecturing those of us like myself who spent north of 5,000 hours studying Gemara, and you're going to tell me what's in the Talmud. So the Talmud is an in-group discussion from 2,000 years ago, and the participants in the discussion, I suspect, had no idea that members of out-groups would ever read their comments. But when you have insular in-groups talking, they will tend to say things that will offend members of out-groups. So that's not unique to Jews or to Christians or to the Japanese.
Documents, or frankly, just what Xi Jinping has been saying about his goals ultimately for China as a great power. So my worry is that if you just completely abandon Taiwan, that's a green light. And while I think it's easy to make loose, appeasement style analogies to the 1930s, you don't necessarily need to go there, but I do think there's a fair amount of truth that it.
Okay, so this is Michael Beckley, and he just published an essay in Foreign Affairs, December 17th. China has the money and the muscle to challenge the United States in certain key areas. So thanks to decades of rapid economic growth, China boasts the world's largest economy when measured by purchasing power parity. It boasts the world's largest trade surplus. It boasts financial reserves. It boasts the largest navy by number of ships and conventional missile force. Chinese investments span the globe. Beijing is pushing for primacy in such strategic technologies as 5G, telecommunications, and AI, artificial intelligence. Add in 4 years of disarray in the American-led world order by President Trump. Hardly surprising that Beijing is now testing the status quo from the South China Sea to the border with India. Yet China's window of opportunity is closing fast. China's window of opportunity will be closing within a decade. Since 2007, China's annual economic growth rate has dropped by more than half. Productivity has declined by 10%. So the average Chinese worker is half as productive as the average Turkish worker. Chinese debt has ballooned eightfold. It has much more debt per capita or overall than the United States. It is on pace to 335% of GDP by the end of 2020. China is not going to be able to reverse these trends. It will lose 200 million working age adults, gain 300 million senior citizens just over the next 30 years. So as economic growth falls, the danger of social and political unrest rises. So China has to expend enormous efforts just keeping control of their own population. And then China is surrounded by 18 nation states that hate it. China has no allies outside of North Korea. Okay, Chinese leaders know this. President Xi Jinping has given multiple speeches warning about the possibility of a Soviet-style collapse in communist China. And Chinese elites are steadily moving their money and their children abroad. Global anti-China sentiment has soared to levels not seen since the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. Nearly a dozen countries have suspended or canceled participation in the Belt and Road Initiative, the Silk Road Initiative, and various projects. Another 16 countries, including 8 of the world's 10 largest economies, have banned or severely restricted use of Huawei products in their 5G networks. India has turned hard against China since a clash on their shared border killed 20 of their soldiers in June. Japan has ramped up military spending. Japan can go nuclear anytime at once. Japan has turned amphibious ships into aircraft carriers. It has strung missile launchers across the Ryukyu Islands near Taiwan. The European Union has labeled China a systemic rival. So whenever you hear the word systemic, you're talking about elite talk. And the elites use the term systemic. And the United Kingdom, France, Germany are sending naval patrols to counter Beijing's expansion in the South China Sea and Indian Ocean. So on multiple fronts, China is facing the blowback created by its own bad behavior. It has no allies except for North Korea. And all its neighbors hate China.
Embolden China, and that will make further conflicts even more likely further down the line.
What would be next on their list?
Well, I think the South China Sea would be the obvious point because, so 80% of their oil and so much of international trade goes through there. They claim it essentially as Chinese territory. And if they were able to impose themselves on the South China Sea, that would make China the hegemon of East Asia. It would essentially confine China's neighbors to narrow bands of coastline around it, and China would be able to call the shots. I think also Japan would suddenly become the next target, because for historical reasons, to right past wrongs of the Japanese brutality against China, as well as for just geopolitical reasons. These are two extremely powerful countries packed together in a small space. And if Taiwan falls, then that provides a staging location to start putting more pressure on Japan. It doesn't necessarily mean war is going to break out, but that conflict that is still raging in the East China Sea, I would expect that to heat up in a post-Taiwan takeover world. So both to the north and to the south, you would see the Chinese Navy moving out if it's no longer bottled up with the Taiwan contingency.
Okay, we have a new president. What should Joe Biden do to diffuse this potential aggression?
I used to be quite a dove when it came to China policy for a lot of the reasons that you've insinuated with your questions. Is it really worth risking a nuclear conflict just to get tough with China? But now I think China has clearly shown that it is intent on expanding throughout East Asia. And I think in the short term, reinforcing deterrence in East Asia is the priority. I think what the Biden administration is going to do is try to multilateralize the Trump policy. So they're going to maintain a hard line with China. They're going to continue to invest in a lot of the same military capabilities also invest technologically and domestically to renew the U.S. economy. But I think the key there is also adding on allied cooperation, doing it in a more multilateral sense, because that's the huge advantage that the United States has over China, whose only ally is North Korea. So I think it's going to be a lot more of the same, just more multilateral from the Biden team.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the subject topic, which comes from Glenn Greenwald. The journalistic tattletale and censorship industry suffers several well-deserved blows. New York Times journalist Taylor Lorenz falsely accuses a tech investor of using a slur after spending months trying to infiltrate and monitor a new app that allows free conversation. So this is New York Times reporter Taylor Lorenz. So you're probably wondering, well, how seriously should I take her opinion? And she's alleging Clubhouse slur. So there's an app called Clubhouse, which is invite only. So she's in the news. Taylor Lorenz's smear is hall monitor journalism. Taylor Lorenz, New York Times reporter, alleges Clubhouse slur. She's got her own website and quite lovely looking lady. Taylor Lorenz. Okay, here's Glenn Greenwald. A new and rapidly growing journalistic beat has arisen over the last several years that can best be described as an unholy mix of junior high hall monitor tattling and Stasi-like citizen surveillance. So I hated tattletales growing up because I was a preacher's kid. If I just say the word bloody, other kids would report me to the teacher. Or I remember there was a time I was in synagogue and this woman had sent me some photos of herself in a bathing suit. And so I thought I was doing a mitzvah. I was just showing them to this fat bloke in synagogue who I think was just, opening up a conversation with me. So like, here I am trying to do a kindness for this guy, showing him these, lovely bathing suit photos. And he went and told on me, and I got in trouble with the organizers of the singles event at the synagogue. So I don't like these tattletales, but guess what? They're a fact of life. So if you don't want to do the time, don't do the crime, right? If you're saying things that can get you in trouble, if you're not prepared, if you're not resilient enough to deal with the trouble, then don't say these things. So I just noticed a lot of people have a vast overestimation of what they can handle. Like a lot of people, I think one friend is like, oh, I'm fine, bro. I'm totally fine. And then his whole life collapsed around him because he couldn't stand behind the things that he was saying publicly. So in the Bible, we have Sarah who tells Abraham, oh, God wants us to have kids, but I'm too old to have kids. So why don't you make a baby with my handmaiden, my servant? And so Abraham goes, you sure? Okay, I'll do that. But Sarah was not able to handle it. So a lot of people imagine that they can handle things that they can't handle. So Sarah got furious when this woman got pregnant and gave Abraham a son. And so she drove the woman Haggai and her son Ishmael, just drove them out of the camp, turned quite vicious. So a lot of people think, oh, I can handle the consequences of, saying the F word or the K word or the D word or the E word or the C word. But when reality strikes and the hall monitor, strikes back, when these journalists start doing their thing, a lot of people find that they can't handle it nearly as much as they thought they could. So it's up to us to become as resilient as possible. And economically, that means usually having multiple sources of income if one's not financially independent. So we've got a lot of journalism these days, particularly with regard to dissident thought. It's the equivalent of junior high hall monitor tattling and Stasi-like citizen surveillance. It is half adolescent and half malevolent. Its primary objectives of control, censorship, and the destruction of reputations for fun and power. Though its epicenter is the largest corporate media outlets, it is the very antithesis of journalism. So I think here there's a tremendous amount of subjectivity. So I don't like this kind of tattling, but reality is the way it is. I want to learn to accept life on life's terms. So there are lots of people who essentially make their living, tattling about naughty words being said, somewhere on the internet. So there's one particularly toxic strain of this authoritarian reporting. Teams of journalists at 3 of the most influential corporate media outlets, CNN's media reporters Brian Stelter and Oliver Darcy, NBC's Disinformation Space Unit, Ben Collins and Brady Zadrozny, and the tech reporters of the New York Times, Mike Isaac, Kevin Roos, and Shira Frankel, devote the bulk of their journalism. I hate the word journalism. It's so pretentious. There's reporting and there is opining. But journalism is just purely pretentious. So these journalists devote the bulk of their work to searching for online spaces where they believe speech and conduct rules are being violated, flagging them, and then pleading that punitive action be taken, banning censorship, content regulation, and after-school detention. These hall monitor reporters are a major factor explaining why tech monopolies never wanted the responsibility to censor, but they now do so with abandon and seemingly arbitrary blunt force. They are shamed by the world's loudest media companies when they do not. So back for a minute to Professor Michael Beckley.
Our policy has long been to engage China, thinking that that would bring them into the world community, increase freedom in that country. Should that still be a goal, to pursue freedom and human rights for China?
Yeah, I mean, I think you obviously want some balance in policy. And I think an article that the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan wrote with Kurt Campbell, I think it was a couple years ago in Foreign Affairs, where their phrase was competition without catastrophe. So you want to do things like reinforce the military deterrent. You want to press China on its human rights abuses, which by all accounts are getting much worse every single year. But at the same time, you want to look for points of common interest. And there are clearly lots of common interests between the two countries, whether it's on climate change or limiting nuclear proliferation or just shoring up the global economy. So there's plenty of common ground there. And certainly you should be open to engagement. But my worry is that you don't want the Biden team to necessarily take their foot off the gas pedal when it comes to reinforcing deterrence and the kind of economic measures we need to protect our technology and to protect our secrets, just to maybe cut a deal on climate change. I think first we need to shore up the deterrence and then negotiate from a position of strength. Frankly, that's what...
Like this bloke. So let's hear a little bit of his commentary.
By Nancy Pelosi. She's furious that Donald Trump got to over the Super Bowl. It was like... It's tasteful gloating. We could you were in the sweet spot gloat-wise there. Thanks a lot, Maestro. A great show. I'm Mark Steyn. Welcome to Fox News Primetime at the start of a week unlike any other in American history. The week of the very first re-impeachment trial anywhere on the planet. Half of all the impeachments in the last quarter millennium have been started by Nancy Pelosi. She's furious that Donald Trump got to serve out his full term of office, just as 3.5 centuries ago, England's restored monarchical deep state was furious that populist Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell got to die in bed. So 3 years after his death, they dug him up and posthumously executed him. They chopped off his head and stuck it on a spike above Westminster Hall for the next quarter century. If they could do that to Trump's head, they would. So they're doing it in spirit. Back when impeachment trials only came along once every 1 1/3 centuries, I had the misfortune to cover the 1998 Clinton trial and was fascinated to learn that the United States Senate could just make it up as it goes along. This time round, they have Patrick Leahy, the leaky senator from Vermont, multitasking. He's both a member of the jury and the presiding judge. That would seem odd in your local county court, unless your county's in North Korea, but in re-impeachment court, anything goes.
Let's face it, the House did an incredibly poor job of building a case before their impeachment vote. There was no process.
It is a farce. It is unconstitutional. But more than anything, it's unwise and going to divide the country.
That ship has sailed. As George Orwell would have put it, unity is division. This is the first time a president is being tried when he no longer holds public office. And some constitutional scholars are a bit queasy about that because the penalty for impeachment is to be removed from the office you hold. Well, that's what the Democrats plan to do. A few days ago, Donald Trump opened in Florida the, quote, office of the former president. And that's the office the Democrats intend to remove him from. The 26 machinations with Comey, Strzok, Bruce Orr, and the rest of the gang were designed to ensure that Donald Trump didn't get to be president. This time, the object is to ensure he doesn't get to be a, quote, former president. In the coming week, they're determined to inflict enough damage that he will be written out of all those Oval Office reunion group shots with Carter, Clinton, Bush, Obama, now and forever. He's going to be the exist ex-president America's ever had. That's their goal. Now, Republicans are being rather blasé about all this. They say, yeah, sure, the Dems may get Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, a couple of others to reach across the aisle, but they need 17 Republicans to convict, and they're never going to get that. So this is all just a waste of time. They're thinking too narrowly. The left is forward-thinking, not like the right. The right's still excited about the prospect of the Durham Report, which is due any decade now, indicting some deputy assistant undersecretary of paperclips at the FBI so he can get 40 hours of community service from some rubber-stamped judge. The right's still investigating the 2016 election, while the left's moved on to fixing the 2024 election. Here's Lindsey Graham, not quite getting it.
If you believe he committed a crime, he can be prosecuted like any other citizen. Impeachment is a political process. We've never impeached a president once they're out of office.
Well, that's why they're doing it. The Democrats aren't worried about Trump running in 2024. They're figuring that by 2024, Trump's either going to be in jail or holed up in Turkmenistan or Abkhazia fighting extradition. So what they want to do is first teach a lesson to any would-be Donald Trumps out there. Forget about it. You guys have had your fun. Trump's never going to happen again. In America, as I used to hear in my boyhood, anyone can grow up to be president. And by anyone, I mean Hillary versus Jeb, as 2016 was meant to be. The wife of the previous president versus the brother and son of the previous presidents. That's all the choice a self-governing republic of 300 million citizens really needs. Then Trump came along and kiboshed that, so you got to forget about Trump or the next Trump. In 2016, he had a pretty good life and figured he'd like to give something back to the country that had given him so much. 5 years later, they want to make the price he'll pay for that so high that any would-be Trump of the late 2020s or early 2030s is going to think, nah, it's not worth it. Secondly, they want to taint the 74 million people who voted for Trump so that the Republican establishment has to spend the next 2 years distancing themselves from the 74 million QAnon, white supremacist, racist insurrectionists all over America. They're good at distancing themselves. The Republican establishment will be distancing themselves so much they'll be campaigning from Bermuda. Maxine Waters wants Trump charged with premeditated murder. Of the 5 people who died on January the 6th, 4 of them were Trump supporters. 3 of them dead from the kind of awful things that happen when large jostling crowds are uncontrolled. 1 heart attack, 1 stroke, 1 poor woman trampled. A second lady was shot dead at close range by law enforcement and has been disappeared down the memory hole. A police officer died, yet 1 month later, no official cause of death has been released, which is odd. I put it no higher than that, but it's not something that happens in functioning jurisdictions, which evidently the capital city of the global superpower no longer is. But in the coming days, Trump's prosecutors will be doing as Maxine Waters recommends and making him a quintuple murderer, and 74 million Americans his co-conspirators, and every non-Trump supporter a, quote, survivor. As this CNN reporter headlines his story, "Is this how I die?" Answer no. Maybe you should try Sudan or Waziristan. Joining me now, former presidential candidate Michelle Bachmann and the Dean of the Regent University Grad School of Government, and somebody who was actually there in the chapel just outside the rotunda. That's the bit everybody knows, with all the statues in Congress, Michelle. So you were a lot nearer to the action than Rashid.
Okay, that was Mark Steyn. He is quite smart, quite funny. Right, I want to get back to Glenn Greenwald. Talking here about journalistic tattletale and the censorship industry. So just as the NSA, the National Security Agency, is obsessed with ensuring there can be no place on Earth where humans can communicate free of the NSA's spying eyes and spying ears, these journalistic hall monitors cannot abide the idea there can be any place on the internet where people are free to speak in ways they do not approve, like some creepy informant for a state security apparatus. They spend their days trolling the depths of chat rooms and 4chan bulletin boards and subreddit threads and private communications apps to find anyone influential or obscure who is saying something they believe should be forbidden. And then they use their corporate megaphones they did not build and could not have built, but have been handed to silence and to destroy anyone who dissents from the orthodoxies of their corporate managers or anyone who challenges their information hegemony. So this is a great article by Glenn Greenwald, but because you feel righteous after reading it, or if you feel enraged or emotional after reading it, doesn't mean that the world is going to change to accommodate your emotional intensity. So these people are a fact of life. And if you understand things from their perspective, they are trying to make a better world. So they're not doing this to uphold orthodoxies from their perspective. They're doing this to provide people with information and to speak truth to power and to try to clean up disinformation. So you're obviously not going to agree with them, but I'm not a big fan of demonizing these people either. So they believe that they're trying to do good reporting. And they've got their own dedication to their own set of moral values. Yes, they clash with my values, they clash with your values, but the world's not going to change to make me more comfortable. Oliver Darcy has built his CNN career by sitting around with Brian Stelter, petulantly pointing to people breaking the rules on social media, demanding tech executives make the rule breakers disappear. Little crew of tattletale millennials assembled by NBC. They refer to their twerpy work with the self-glorifying title of working in the disinformation space. Right? This crew, they're intrepid and hazardous as exposing corruption by a repressive regime or reporting from war zones. That's what they think they're doing. They spend their dreary days scrolling through 4chan boards to expose the offensive memes and bad words used by transgressive adolescents. They then pat themselves on the back for confronting dangerous power centers, even when it is nothing more trivial and bullying than doxing the identities of powerless, obscure citizens. So remember when CNN, went to the home of some old lady because she had shared some apparently Russian disinformation. Remember they went and doxed this lady, just showed up.
But what part of it in this is a cover-up? What are you saying that's not true, or what?
The Russians, I don't care if they were involved or not. That to me is the least important thing.
But they were involved with you. Did you guys know that?
They weren't involved with us. Just make sure that you report it correctly,
But you guys were involved with being patriotic, right?
Very, very patriotic, but not...
Being patriotic was the group that contacted and helped organize some of these activities that you posted on your own Facebook account.
Those were legitimate.
Those were Russians.
They were not Russians. I don't go with the Russians.
That group was Russian.
I have nothing to do with the Russians.
Well, apparently you did.
No.
Maybe you didn't know it, but you did.
When you're talking like this, I don't want to have anything to do with you.
Well, I'm talking what's
people
based on
that were with me were all Trump supporters. Very, very much so.
And all apparently following the direction of groups that were associated with Russians who were actually infiltrated.
BS. And please report that. I don't believe that. That's bullshit. I know all the people that were with me, okay? They were at my meetings. They're all Trump supporters, okay?
Mm-hmm. But did you realize that you guys were in communication electronically with Russians?
Not me. I don't know.
You were posting stuff on the Facebook.
Hillary Clinton was, and so was all her bandits.
Some of the stuff that you were in charge of the Facebook account, right? You were posting and reposting almost word for word the information that was coming out of this Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg.
No.
You don't believe that?
Nope. It's bullshit. Thank you.
Says she never communicated with any Russians, says no one at any of their protests were anything but Americans for Trump. So CNN shows up at a lady's front door. Great job, CNN. So Oliver Darcy, January 7th, tweeted, "There is, rightly, a lot of focus on Trump in the aftermath of yesterday. But the tech convo should be bigger than Trump. Big tech has, for years, allowed bad faith actors who lie and mislead and provoke." Wow, that sounds like what some of every journalistic outlet do, all right? It's not like there are journalistic outlets or even individuals who never do wrong, right? It's a New Testament verse like all have sinned, right? Well, everybody does bad things. Everybody lies at times, everybody misleads, and everybody provokes. But big tech has allowed bad faith actors. Well, it's not like bad faith actors are always just a totally different species than regular people. Everybody is at times a bad faith actor. Big tech has allowed bad faith actors, as though these are like a completely separate category of human beings, to exploit their algorithms for attention and build massive followings. So doesn't CNN and every cable news network do what they can to build massive followings and to exploit the news for attention? Right? people who work in the news business think that what they're doing is essential to democracy, that it's making people better and more worthy citizens of democracy, that they're speaking truth to power, and that they are conveying some kind of sacred message. And this is nonsense. There's absolutely no connection between the news and what is true. You don't become a better member of democracy by watching the news. It generally makes you worse. And the news is not generally speaking truth to power and to money. Oliver Darcy. Every day on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, some of the most dishonest people are empowered and algorithmically encouraged to spread lies and conspiracy theories and hyper-partisan nonsense to large audiences. Tech platforms have not grappled with this in any meaningful way. Oh, doesn't that sound like CNN? For 3 years on CNN and on the New York Times, the LA Times, Washington Post, the number one story for 3 years was that Trump may well have colluded with the Russians to fix the 2016 election. So they'd be somewhat careful in their wording often, but that would be the upshot of pretty much thousands upon thousands of stories that the 2016 election was essentially fixed by Trump-Russia collusion. Turned out to be completely bogus, yet it was the number one news story in the nation for 3 years, places like CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post. So essentially they were spreading lies and conspiracy theories and hyper-partisan nonsense to large audiences. Now, has CNN, the New York Times, Washington Post grappled with their history of spreading lies, conspiracy theories, and hyper-partisan nonsense to large audiences? No, of course not. Back to Glenn Greenwald. The worst of this triumvirate is the New York Times tech reporters, due to influence and reach, no other reason. When Silicon Valley monopoly is publicly pressured by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other lawmakers united to remove Parler from the internet, the New York Times tech team quickly donned their hall monitor goggles and Stasi notebooks to warn that the bad people had migrated to Signal and to Telegram. This week they asked, are private messaging apps the next misinformation hotspot? One reporter confessed that I am worried about Telegram. Other than private messaging, people love to use Telegram for group chats. Up to 200,000 people can meet inside a Telegram chat room. That seems problematic. He's worried about that people have means to communicate that he may not get access to. These examples of journalism being abused to demand censorship of spaces they cannot control, too numerous to comprehensively chronicle. They are not confined to those three outlets. The far more robust censorship is urgently needed. It's now a virtual consensus in mainstream corporate journalism. It is an animating cause for them. Mark Steyn talking to Michelle Bachmann.
Tlaib or AOC, but you weren't invited to tell your story of survival in the House of Representatives the other night.
No, that's true. I was there. I wasn't there by design. I was there because I wanted to be there to pray, because that was a big day when they were going to certify the election results. And actually, when I left and I walked through the rotunda, I think that some of the people had actually already breached the building, but I didn't see them. And I walked out and couldn't get out because we were locked in. And I was locked in for about 5 hours after that and spent the bulk of that time over in the House office buildings.
Well, you've seen how it's been. That was a month ago. You've seen this narrative that the left has constructed since with the assistance of the media. They basically weaponized that event on January the 6th to serve their purposes. It's kind of creepy to have what seems to me a largely fake narrative that's been imposed on what happened that day.
Well, it is a fake narrative. It's absolutely sick because, like you said, they're trying to destroy the names and reputation, the legacy of all the people who voted for Donald Trump for a second term. But they're trying to do that for Donald Trump as well. I think Donald Trump was the greatest president in my lifetime. What he achieved on a public policy level is incomparable to any other president. And yet he's been made toxic in the last month, and we're being made toxic if we even admit that we voted for him either the first time or the second time. That's the...
Okay, back to this Glenn Greenwald piece. And he quotes Steve Cole. I think he's the dean of Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. He's a staff writer at The New Yorker. And he says, those of us in journalism have to come to terms with the fact that free speech, a principle that we hold sacred, is being weaponized against the principles of journalism. So Steve Cole and many increasing number of journalists no longer fans of free speech. And he contributes to Vox. He runs a major journalistic listserv appropriately called Study Hall. And there's Kyle Chayka. He's already begun shaming Substack for hosting writers he regards as unacceptable, such as Jesse Singal, Andrew Sullivan, and Barry Weiss. recent Guardian article warned that podcasts was one remaining area still insufficiently policed. ProPublica on Sunday did the same about Apple. Last month, one of its reporters appeared on MSNBC to demand that Apple censor its podcast content as aggressively as Google's YouTube now censors its video content. So we have the unimaginably warped dynamic in which U.S. journalists are not the defenders of free speech, but the primary crusaders to destroy free speech. They do it in part for power, to ensure nobody but they can control the flow of information because, hey, they've got fact checkers and editors. Everything they publish, it has to go through all these different layers of fact checkers and editors so that it's pristine. Now, if you know anything about a subject and then you see a TV report on it or a journalism report on it, you know how superficial and shoddy journalism tends to be. There's absolutely zero connection between what is news and what is true. And watching the news and reading newspapers does not inherently make people better citizens. People would be far better off just reading books and ignoring the news. Journalists do this for ideology and out of hubris. They have a belief that their worldview is so indisputably right that all dissent is inherently dangerous disinformation. I don't recall, did we hear disinformation, that term, much before Donald Trump? I don't recall disinformation being thrown around nearly as much before Donald Trump was running for president. And they also do it from petty vindictiveness. They clearly get aroused by destroying people's reputations and lives, no matter how powerless. Whatever the motive, corporate media employees whose company title is journalists are the primary activists against a free and open internet and the core values of free thought.
The objective: destroy Donald Trump's name, his business, his finances, his political legacy, and his political future, and destroy any of us who admit to supporting his agenda.
How do you think impeachment week is going to go? Because you're a lawyer. You know that as a legal, no county prosecutor would bring this in your local courthouse, this incitement case. But this is a political trial, and the rules are different. How do you think the week's going to go?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is not a legal proceeding by any stretch of the imagination. This is bad political dinner theater. That's all we're going to get this week. But again, what are the purposes for this? The first purpose is to destroy Donald Trump, destroy any opportunity that he would have for his own name and a political future. They also want to send the signal through impeachment that anyone who deviates from present-day groupthink is going to be Gonzville in the future. And third, the other thing that they want to do is they want to make sure that they can distract from what's happening in the White House. You know, right now it's a grand theft larceny of the American form of governance, our constitutional republic. And instead, we're getting some sort of a lawless hierarchy. Because what happened in November with the elections wasn't simply a transfer from a Republican administration to a Democrat administration. This was a hightailing of it, of our form of government. On paper, we're still a constitutional republic, but in practice, we're a lawless hierarchy.
Well, that's a good...
All right, back to Glenn Greenwald. The profound pathologies driving all of this were on full display Saturday night as a result of a reckless and self-humiliating smear campaign by one of the New York Times star tech reporters, Taylor Lorenz. So she falsely accused Mark Andreessen. So she went after Mark Andreessen. Where is Taylor Lorenz? Here she is. So she falsely and publicly accused Silicon Valley entrepreneur and investor Mark Andreessen of having used the slur word retarded during a discussion about the Reddit GameStop uprising. Lorenz lied. Andreessen never used that word. Rather than apologize and retract it, she justified her mistake by claiming it was a male voice that sounded like his. Then she locked her Twitter account as though she, rather than the person she falsely maligned, was the victim. So this discussion took place on a new audio app called Clubhouse. It's an invitation-only platform intended to allow for private, free-ranging group conversations. It's popular among Silicon Valley executives of various media personalities. As the app has grown, people of more diverse backgrounds have begun joining. It's carved out a niche among Black users who have innovated new ways for using it. So Clubhouse's free speech ethos has made it increasingly popular in China as a way of avoiding repressive online constraints. Now, these private chats are often infiltrated by journalists, sometimes by invitation, sometimes by deceit. These journalists attempt to monitor the discussions and then publish summaries. Often the reporting consists of out-of-context statements designed to make the participants look bigoted, insensitive, or otherwise guilty of bad behavior. So journalists desperate for content have flagged Clubhouse as a new frontier for their slimy work as voluntary hall monitors and speech police. So let's have a glance here at some of Taylor Lorenz's cutting-edge reporting. She just makes up stuff about Mark Andreessen. So here she is tweeting that Mark Andreessen just used the R slur. Never even heard of the R slur until now. Now, numerous Clubhouse participants immediately documented that she lied. Rather than apologizing and retracting, Lorenz thanked them for clarifying, then emphasized how hurtful it is to use that R-word slur. She then deleted her original tweet without content, and then with the smear fully realized, she locked her account. Thanks for clarifying. Besides the fact that a New York Times reporter recklessly tried to destroy someone's reputation, what the heck is wrong with this story? Well, everything. So the participants in Clubhouse tried to block these Tattletale reporters from eavesdropping on their private conversations precisely because they see themselves as Stasi agents whose function is to report people for expressing prohibited ideas even in private conversations. This is why people block journalists, because of this kind of dishonesty. One reporter recently complained she was blocked by Andreessen from his Clubhouse discussions as if she had some kind of divine right to monitor people's communications. So this New York Times reporter uses her New York Times platform to virtually jump out of her desk to run to the teacher and exclaim, "He used the R word." This is what she tried for months to accomplish, to catch people in private conversations using words that are prohibited or ideas that are banned to speak to the public. And then she got it all wrong. But this is now the prevailing ethos in corporate journalism. They have insufficient talent or skill, even less desire to take on real power centers such as the military, industrial complex, the CIA, the FBI, the clandestine security state, Wall Street, Silicon Valley monopolies, the corrupt and lying corporate media outlets that they serve. So settling on this penny ante, trivial BS, tattling, hall monitoring, speech policing, all in the most anti-intellectual, adolescent, and primitive ways is all they have. It's all they are. It's why they have fully earned the contempt and distrust in which the public holds them.
Good phrase for it, because I was going to say that Joe Biden has been governing by royal proclamation, but that actually does a disservice to royal proclamations. Michelle, it's always great to see you, and I'm glad that you survived without having to go through all that survival theatre that those congressmen were doing the other day. Thanks a lot, Michelle Bachman, and it's a pleasure to turn to Conrad Black. He's an eminent Canadian historian, but don't hold that against him. He's a member of the House of Lords, but don't hold that against him. He actually got stiffed by America's dirty, rotten, corrupt federal justice system and was banged up in the big house where he taught American history to American prisoners. He got pardoned by President Trump, and it's a pleasure to have him with us. Conrad, how does this smell good constitutionally? You know American history better than most Americans. How's it smell to you from a constitutional perspective?
Rancid, absolutely rancid, Mark. I think Congresswoman Bachman had it right, that it's preposterous. I mean, the precedent, not that the circumstances of leaving office were at all similar, but was with President Nixon. Once he was an ex-president, there was an attempt to at least prepare charges against him. He was judged unfit for trial for physical reasons, health reasons, by Judge Sirica after doctors had inspected him, and then, of course, he was pardoned. But when you are not in the presidency or other high offices governed by that part of the Constitution, you're a citizen like anyone else, vulnerable to prosecution if there's supposedly grounds for it. Incidentally, I think if the Democrats had been smart, they would have proceeded in that way. The trial would be in Washington, D.C. It's a town that voted 95% Democratic in the last few elections, and I think they might even get a conviction on anything there, a Maxine Waters kind of case, although it would be overturned on appeal. But
Okay, let me go back to this great Glenn Greenwald essay. The same stunted mentality just resulted in the destruction of the career and reputation of Taylor Lorenz's far more accomplished colleague, science reporter Donald McNeil. So the more prestigious your position, the more vulnerable you are to being canceled. So plumbers and, say, construction workers and drivers for Uber and Lyft, they're not as vulnerable as, say, reporters for the New York Times or college professors. On a 2019 field trip for rich high school kids to Peru, Donald McNeil of the New York Times used the N-word after a student asked him whether he thought it was fair that one of her classmates was punished for having used it in a video. McNeil used it not with malice nor as a racist insult, but to inquire about the facts of the video so he could answer the student's question. After New York Times senior editors, including African-American editor-in-chief Dean Baquet, investigated and concluded that only a reprimand was appropriate, did not appear to me that his intentions were hateful or malicious, said Baquet. Dozens of McNeil's colleagues wrote a furious letter demanding far more severe punishment. Our community is outraged and in pain, said the 150 Times employees, adding, intent is irrelevant. Intent is irrelevant when judging how harshly to punish this storied journalist for uttering this word. And they got what they wanted. McNeil wrote a groveling, abject apology, and then the Times announced he was gone from his job after 45 years with the paper, including for COVID reporting over the last year that the paper submitted for a Pulitzer Prize. Let's think about that. New York Times employees who were unionized demanded that management punish a fellow union member more harshly than management wanted to. 2002, McNeil won the first place prize from the National Association of Black Journalists for excellence in his reporting on how the AIDS crisis was affecting Africa. Now, his 45-year career and reputation are destroyed at the hands of his own colleagues because intent is irrelevant when using off-limit words. So the overarching rule of liberal media circles and liberal politics is that you are free to accuse anyone who deviates from liberal orthodoxy of any kind of bigotry that casually crosses your mind. You just smear them as racist, misogynist, homophobic, transphobic without the slightest need for evidence, and it will be regarded as completely acceptable. That is the rubric under which the most famous lawyer of the ACLU decided on Saturday to brand two of his ideological opponents as closely aligned with white supremacists. They're fresh off being named by Time magazine as one of the planet's 100 most influential human beings. Trans activist and ACLU lawyer Chase Strangio decided to spew this extremely grave accusation about J.K. Rowling and Abigail Shrier, both of whom oppose the inclusion of trans girls in female sports. He tweeted, "The reality is that people like J.K. and Shrier and all the rest of them are closely aligned with white supremacists in power, and their rhetoric, in turn, creates dangerous policy proposals and eventually laws. We have a lot of mobilizing to do."
It's going to be hard for them to do that once he's been acquitted by the U.S. Senate. And, of course, he will be acquitted by the U.S. Senate.
That's actually a vital point, Conrad. I mean, if they had actually brought a case in a D.C. courthouse, any D.C. jury is basically 11 Democrats, and the 12th one is a Green or a Socialist or some other fringe party. So they actually probably could get a conviction in a D.C. courthouse.
On the first instance, I think they probably could, because if you're a Republican, you'll be convicted. There are only 15,000 Republican voters in D.C. But I think, as it is the stupidest legislative initiative in the entire history of the United States. And I've done some research so that isn't as absurd a superlative as it sounds. What is going to happen is you're going to have the argument that the election was an unjust verdict and a rigged result, put squarely on an even basis with the alternative view for 16 hours by the ex-president's counsel. And the fact is, I think Donald Trump exaggerates when he claims that he won the popular vote. I don't think he can make that case. But there have been 6 previous elections where the winner had fewer votes than his chief opponent, including John F. Kennedy, if the Alabama votes are counted directly. And I think you could easily make the case that if 50,000 votes had flipped between Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Wisconsin, he would have won.
Yeah, Donald Trump was 43,000 votes away from winning in 2020. So here we've got this ACLU lawyer who feels it's perfectly okay to go around casually branding people as closely aligned to white supremacists. So this lawyer named one of the world's 100 most influential people. So he brands people white supremacists, people who've never remotely demonstrated any such affinity, just because he feels like it, just because he craves the power to destroy his adversaries, and just because he's too lazy to engage their actual views. And this is completely acceptable behavior in mainstream liberal circles. Glenn Greenwald notes, I just spent the week being widely branded by these people as misogynist, as someone who hates women, because I criticized and mocked Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez for her scornful rejection of the offer from Senator Ted Cruz to work with her to investigate Robin Hood's conduct in the GameStop affair. I particularly critiqued her ludicrous accusation to Ted Cruz that you almost had me murdered, claimed that even CNN's fact-checker Daniel Dale, who'd rather poke out his own eyes than conclude that a popular Democrat has lied. Even Daniel Dale of CNN said this without evidence, because Cruz did not advocate violence against Ocasio-Cortez, much less call for her murder. So just by criticizing Ocasio-Cortez, Glenn Greenwald was casually and widely cast as a sexist hater of women. Jezebel says that he was a misogynist. And Media Matters says Greenwald's hatred of women knows no bounds. Consider how many people in journalism or other professions whose positions are less secure are rightly terrorized by these low-life tactics. Intimidated into silence and into conformity, they know if they express views these Stasi agents and their bosses dislike, their reputations can be instantly destroyed, so they remain silent or pliant out of necessity.
That'll be out there, and it will be a tainted election, even more than it is now, in front of 75 million people. And I agree with what Michelle Bachmann said, and you and others, but the fact is, the opposition to Trump, the hate Trump movement, can't keep that plane in the air for 4 years. And it is not going to be possible to continue to distract public attention from the shortcomings of this administration, which we're already getting a hint of.
Let me just ask you about what the Democrats say. They found a few constitutional scholars, so-called, to go back to this Secretary of War, Mr. Belknap, 150 years ago, who was impeached, who was tried after he left office. And they're saying this is the great constitutional precedent. Do you think this sophistry has any merit to it?
No. In the first place, that was a Reconstruction issue, and you had even more rabid partisanship. I mean, after all, it was the afterpiece, the postlude to a terrible war in which 750,000 Americans died in a population of 31 million. And spirits were even higher, if you can imagine it, than they are now. At least we haven't got to Civil War yet. And in the second place, this fact situation was completely different.
Well, thank you, Conrad. At least we haven't.
May I make one historic point for you?
Yeah, no, that was great. The glass is 1/10 full. It's always good to take that perspective. According to Time magazine, the election wasn't rigged; it was simply fortified, and now we know how. That's coming up next on Fox News Primetime.
Remembers things apparently is to keep coming back. About twice daily Zydraft, helping to avoid serious illness.
Only one side to this particular story, and
single state.
Oh, sure there are. Weeks back. Still have questions about the 2020 elections? Well, forget it. You're not allowed to ask them. Don't take my word for it. Here's what ABC's George Stephanopoulos said a couple of weeks back.
Can't you just say the words, this election was not stolen? Why can't you say,
well, I think where you make a mistake.
There are not two sides to the story. This has been looked at in every single state. The election
sure there are.
Certified in every
sides to every
state.
story.
Looks like poor old Rand is going to need another couple months in re-education camp. There's only one side to this particular story, and it was described in detail in a glowing piece from Time magazine titled, quote, "The Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election," unquote. Shadow campaign. It describes in detail what Democrats and their allies were doing behind the scenes. Mass voter registrations, ballot harvesting, bullying Republican officials, changing election laws. But don't worry, quote, "They were not rigging the election, they were fortifying it."
Well, I read this article pretty carefully. There is nothing illegal in anything that went on here, and I really don't see anything nefarious. So I appreciate the passion of these Fox News hosts like Mark Steyn, but does he have any substance in his critique?
Fortifying it. There's an interesting word now. The one and only Miranda Devine of the New York Post is with us. Miranda, it almost sounds as if they all couldn't resist coming together and boasting about it now that the new regime has been in office for a couple of weeks.
Yes, good evening, Mark. Isn't it amazing? They couldn't wait until even after the impeachment to actually come out and gloat, such is their hubris. And it's interesting also, we now have a new word, fortifying. You don't often see words change meaning overnight, but there you have it. Now you'll look up your thesaurus and you'll see that the synonym for fortifying is cheating. So this is really a legal cheating that Time magazine is telling.
That is incredibly irresponsible. There is zero evidence of any cheating in here. If they had evidence of cheating, you'd think she'd bring it up. So Miranda Devine, Mark Steyn, I enjoy them, but they're irresponsible and completely dishonest here. There's nothing in that article that indicates cheating. Changing the laws about voting to facilitate mail-in voting is not cheating. It's working within the system.
Telling us went on by a cabal, they called it a collusion, they called it, to manipulate the 2020 election.
Okay, so you said that they were cheating. Provide some evidence, or you're just lying for partisan advantage.
And while the author was saying that this was not illegal or in any way unethical.
Okay, so notice she accused them of cheating. Mark Steyn and Miranda Devine have both accused the participants in this Time magazine article of cheating, and it's not just people on the left. the Time magazine articles about people on the left, people on the right, uniting to try to pull off a very challenging election with mail-in ballots. Half the ballots cast were mail-in. So this was an extraordinary time in America. So people on the right, people on the left, united around trying to create an electoral system that would work for this extraordinary time. So I didn't see any evidence in this article of cheating. So Mark Steyn, Miranda Devine have just made very substantive, very heavy critiques that this article is all about cheating by a cabal. So I'm curious if they're going to be able to substantiate it, because if they can't substantiate this allegation, these people are completely irresponsible. And I enjoy Mark Steyn and I enjoy Tucker Carlson, but they are frequently fearmongers. They're frequently irresponsible. They're just trying to produce certain emotional effects, telling people what they want to hear with no regard for truth.
Ethical, it's pretty obvious that when you have all the power structures of the country aligned to achieve one outcome, which is get rid of Donald Trump.
The article didn't say anything about how this was, all the key power structures aligning to get rid of Donald Trump. Said that many different powerful individuals and groups were concerned that the 2020 election would be chaotic and a mess, and that there'd be widespread rioting and looting. And there was not widespread rioting and looting after the election, in part, perhaps, to the efforts of these individuals and groups. But Miranda Devine and Mark Steyn, they feel it's okay to lie if it's for partisan advantage. If you're lying for a good cause, if you're saying things that have no factual basis, but you're firing up your base, that's A-okay. So this is why people are better off not watching cable TV news or any TV news, because it's so trashy.
That's really not particularly fair. And today it's ridiculous that you have the AFL-CIO boss whinging and moaning about the fact that Joe Biden axed the Keystone XL pipeline on day one. I think he was more upset that it was day one. But he has to be kidding. It was his senior advisor who engineered this entire, what Time calls a conspiracy. It was the AFL-CIO. They knew all along what was going on because they were in the thick of it. They were in cahoots with big business and big tech and...
Okay, in cahoots doing what exact cheating? Because if they're working within the system, if they are obeying the law, then on what basis do you say that's cheating? She can't substantiate her wild accusations, which makes me quite suspicious of all of her work. She is so reckless with truth here. Like for Miranda Devine, and unfortunately it seems on occasion for Mark Steyn, truth has only an instrumental value. It's just something that they manipulate and use for partisan advantage. I just lost any respect for these people.
Big everything else to make sure that this outcome happened. And so I hope that the workers on the Keystone XL pipeline who lose their jobs, I hope they know that they can blame the union that they're paying dues to. And I hope the AFL-CIO just lives in infamy with its own workers forever because of that. They sold their workers.
Okay, so why is she going off on the AFL-CIO and the Keystone Pipeline? Why doesn't she substantiate her allegation that this article provides evidence of massive cheating? Because I read the article and I saw zero evidence of cheating.
Down the river.
Yeah, those Keystone guys are actually pretty unfortified by this so-called fortified election. It's a fascinating piece because, as I understand it, in the United States, elections are supposed to be run by county election officials, and they're the one group not mentioned in this piece. In this piece, you've got big tech.
United States elections have never solely been the responsibility of county election officials. There are also federal laws about elections. There are also state laws. There are also city statutes about elections. It's never been solely in the hands of county officials. Immediately after the 2020 election, within 3 days, I became deeply concerned that Donald Trump had been cheated out of the presidency, he'd been cheated out of re-election. So I did some research. I read parts of 3 conservative books alleging widespread voter fraud, 2 of them by John Fund, one by Hugh Hewitt, and they were absolutely pathetic. And then I read two top academic works on essentially the myth of voter fraud, and they were highly impressive works. So I immediately saw there's been this long history of low-level, irresponsible Republican accusations of voter fraud, which to this date, to the best of my knowledge, they've been unable to substantiate. There may have been massive voter fraud. We just have not been presented with evidence of which I'm aware. Maybe there's evidence out there that I'm either unaware of or I did not understand. But it is indisputable that Republican allegations of voter fraud have not been substantiated in a way that unbiased observers find compelling. So whenever you have a side arguing a point, and if they have a good point, you've got a heuristic, an easy way to tell if one side may well have a good point. You'll have people without a dog in the fight who will start to come around to the partisan side. So that always happens, right? If you've got facts, logic on your side, if you're making a good point, eventually people who don't have a dog in the fight will start to take your side or say, hey, there may be something here. That hasn't happened with these election voter fraud allegations. So normally, if the left is making a good point, say about environmental regulation, you will find people in the center and even some people in the right coming around saying, hey, the left's got a good point here. And if the right makes a good point about the benefits of, say, deregulation or lower tax cuts, eventually you'll get some people in the center, even some people on the left saying, oh, maybe a modified version of this would be a good idea. But these allegations of voter fraud deciding the 2020 election have been so wild and so unsubstantiated that you don't find anybody of substance in the center or the left saying, hey, maybe they're onto something.
You've got big business, you've got unions, you've got media, you've got Democrats, you've got never-Trump Republicans, but the people who should be organizing the election, county officials, are apparently irrelevant to this process. Everybody else gets to fortify the election, except for people who favor Donald Trump.
Well, exactly. And, big tech, we now know why the New York Post's Hunter Biden laptop story was so rapidly and so decisively shut down and censored by Twitter and Facebook. And that was because they'd been primed for months beforehand by civil rights lawyers like the very woman who has now been nominated by Joe Biden to be his associate attorney general. So, there are rewards for this kind of behavior and for bullying Mark Zuckerberg. They talk about this dinner that Mark Zuckerberg was forced to have in his home to host 9 civil rights leaders who were pressuring him. They talked about it, pressuring in this story. The people like Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey from Twitter to ensure that they would censor information that was not favourable to this cabal of left-wing activists and, big union, the AFL-CIO, and everybody else who was trying to get Joe Biden all in there. And, the other disgusting thing about this is...
Look, I read the article. There's nothing in there about censoring information that would be unfavorable to opponents of Donald Trump. There were efforts to combat bad information, inaccurate information about voter fraud. Now, I'm not a big fan of this kind of censorship, but just because I'm opposed to this kind of censorship against what's called disinformation doesn't mean that I'm going to accord with the dishonest way that Miranda Devine and Mark Steyn are putting things. So I'm placing a link to this Time magazine article. Read it for yourself. It seems to me all the dissident right commentators I've seen trumpeting this article have clearly not even bothered to read it.
Is that
it's incredible to me, Miranda, because it was like 2 weeks before we went from you can't talk about stopping the steal to boasting and bragging about stopping the steal, which is what this Time magazine post does. It's quite incredible. You can't object to the election, but you can brag.
There's nothing, zip, zero, zilch. I read the Time magazine article. There's nothing in this article that says that there was systematic voting fraud and that this cabal, carried out massive cheating.
About fortifying it. Thank you very much, Miranda Devine. Trump supporters have been ordered to unite, and they do. They found it in their hearts to shovel a liberal neighbor's driveway. But could there be something more nefarious behind this good deed of snow shoveling? The Los Angeles Times thinks so. That's next on Fox News Primetime. Heffernan's Trump voting neighbors at her rustic pandemic getaway had the audacity to plough her snowy driveway the other day for free, which prompted her to ask the question, how can I resist demands for unity, even in the face of this act of aggressive niceness? Don't worry, she found a way. Free driveway work, as nice as it is just not the same currency as justice and truth. To pretend it is would be to lie, and they probably aren't looking for absolution anyway. And then she compared her neighbours to Hezbollah and the Nazi Party. But it could have been worse. She could have had me as her plough driver. Yeah, that's how I bust into TV. I was doing Sean Hannity's driveway, and I ploughed over his guest host. Right now, we have the great Dave Rubin, host of the Rubin Report, with us. I couldn't tell at first whether this was a parody of...
Okay, I think I'm going to skip Dave Rubin's opinion. So I'll read the final paragraph here from the Glenn Greenwald article. The purpose, the function of these lowly accusatory tactics to control, to coerce, to dominate, to repress people who engage in these character-assassinating, censorship-fostering games, especially those who call themselves journalists, deserve nothing but intense scorn. Those who are free from their influence and power have a particular obligation to heap it on them. Aside from being what it deserves, that scorn is the only way to neutralize this tactic. So the world premiere of Apricot Sky is coming up on my YouTube channel, Luke Ford Livestreams 18, coming up in about 20 minutes. So I look forward to that. Let's close out with a nice piece of music here.